In this video, we will be exploring the entire 4th tier of the largest unsolved mystery iceberg ever made. The full iceberg has over 1,000 entries, and in this video, we will explore one of the most mysterious and horrific deaths ever of an entire hiking group in Russia, to a treasure hunt that is still open to this day for absolutely anyone to attempt. The clues are all in these books written by the author and creator of the treasure hunt. 3 out of the 12 treasures have been found. They're all in North America. And the reward for finding one is a rare, expensive, precious gem. To one of the most chilling, terrifying, and mysterious phone calls from an ex-Area 51 employee making some extremely dark and terrifying claims.
They are not what they claim to be.
These are just a few of the cases covered, and the rest range from missing persons to serial killers to unsolved murders to hoaxes, cryptids, paradoxes, and much more. This video is a supercut of every video I made in the 4th tier, and so it contains a ton of cases. I've removed all of the intros and outros for them, cleaned them up a little bit, and so with all that being said, please enjoy this supercut of the 4th tier of the Unsolved Mystery Iceberg. So grab a drink, my choice today is English breakfast tea, and join me as we explore the Unsolved Mystery Iceberg. So we are on to tier 4 out of 11 of the iceberg, and to start off with, we have the quote, "What does it do? That's the beauty of it. It doesn't do anything." So this quote sounds really familiar to a lot of people. Even when I read this, I thought that it sounded familiar, but after extensively searching the internet, film listings, movie and TV quotes, and even radio shows, there doesn't really seem to be a direct source for this quote. The closest quote that someone has come up with is from an old black and white TV series called Burke's Law that aired in 1964.
Big one.
What is it?
Well, it's my therapy. I'm still perfecting it.
What does it do?
Do?
What's it for?
Well, nothing. I mean, that's the beauty of it. No, every machine in the world is selling, but not mine. No.
But if you have some idea of where this quote might have come from, let me know in the comments below. The 12 Heidenberg fires were a series of 12 arson attacks on the artistic works of Tyree Guyton. He has a collection called the Heidelberg Project, which consists of one-of-a-kind creations that he started in 1973. When he returned from his military service, he was disappointed by the level of degradation and drabness on the street that he grew up on. So he decided to fix it up. He tidied up vacant houses and lots, replaced some of the windows and boards, and gave everything a fresh coat of paint. Over the years, he progressively turned these houses into essentially art pieces, both inside the houses and on the streets surrounding them. But not everyone loved his work, and there were a fair amount of people who saw the project as just a massive eyesore. So in 1991 and again in 1999, the city demolished some of the houses involved in this project for, as they put it, urban renewal. But Guyton didn't let that faze him, and he just kept on making them until 2013, when these now dubbed Heidelberg fires destroyed 8 of these homes. Arson attacks are apparently very hard to solve, and it is unlikely the culprit behind these attacks will ever really be caught. But Guyton said he just wants to go on creating and making art that people love and can look up to. The 2003 ricin letters. So ricin is a potent poison made from the seeds of the castor oil plant. It is extremely toxic if it is inhaled, injected, ingested, and even if ricin is in dust form and it enters through the eyes or broken skin, it can be extremely deadly. So it shouldn't come as a surprise that there was an emergency called when 2 letters laden with ricin were found between October and November 2003. One was mailed to the White House, and another was discovered in South Carolina with no address. The letters were sent and signed by someone who referred to themselves simply as the Fallen Angel, and the sender said that they owned a trucking company, and that recent changes to trucking regulations had upset his business and angered him. So he sent the White House a letter containing ricin, which is a completely normal and rational thing to do. In 2004, police announced a $100,000 reward for information leading to the solving of the case. But as of today, that reward remains unclaimed. The agogwi, also known as the kakundakari or kilomba in Zimbabwe and Congo, is a small human-like creature first spotted in the jungles of East Africa in 1900 by Captain William Hitchens. They stand between 2 and 5 feet tall, look eerily human, and have rust-colored hair covering their entire body. There hasn't been a sighting since the 1950s, but it's thought that they could have been a surviving species of Australopithecine, which was a very early form of human from over 2.5 million years ago. Alonzo Brooks was a 23-year-old man who went missing in 2004. He traveled to a party with 3 of his friends, roughly an hour from where he lived, and one by one throughout the night, his friends left the party, each assuming that someone else would give Alonzo a lift back home. Witnesses at the party say that racial slurs were thrown at Alonzo throughout the night, and that this might have started a fight at some point. The next day, when Alonzo didn't show at home, he was reported missing. Both the FBI and the KBI, or Kansas Bureau of Investigation, searched and could not find Brooks, so his family was allowed to search the property, and they found Alonzo on their first day. He was lying on the banks of a creek next to the house where he was last seen. They found no broken bones, no signs of blunt force trauma, and no signs of drowning, so his death was thought to be inconclusive. In 2020, the FBI reopened the case and issued a $100,000 reward for information, but it has not been claimed. It seems like Alonzo was likely stuck at the party with no way home, and something perhaps kicked off, and with everyone drinking, Alonzo unfortunately got caught up in it. It is a very sad case, but although there have been no major breakthroughs, the FBI say that they are doing everything they can to get to the bottom of this. But take that as you will. The Alps murders were a strange Sherlock-esque set of murders that took place in September 2012. 4 people were killed: an Iraqi tourist named Saad al-Hili, his wife Iqbal, her mother Sayla al-Alaf, and a French cyclist named Sylvain Molière. Saad's 2 daughters survived the attack, with one being shot in the shoulder but ultimately making a full recovery. As this name suggests, this attack took place in the Alps mountain range, and all of the victims were shot and found on a lay-by by a mountainside road. Saad and his family had apparently driven there, and Sylvain had cycled there. In 2007, after 5 years of investigating, the French police said they had no working theory to explain the murders and no suspects, which is just fantastic. Firstly, it's unclear which party was the intended target, whether it was Saad and his family and Sylvain was just in the wrong place, wrong time, or whether it was the other way round. Saad's family was found with the victims each shot twice in their head, in their car, which was in reverse gear with the doors locked shut. So perhaps they stopped to help someone, and when things went south, they tried to escape, maybe reversing away from the person, but they were just a little too late. Sylvain was found dead near the car, having been shot 7 times. So theories about this one are kind of wild. One theory was that this was the work of Saad's brother Saeed, with investigators stating that Saeed created a false will for his father and actually tried to withdraw £2 million from his father's Swiss bank account. So maybe a potential inheritance was the motive. Another theory was that Saad worked for various aerospace, energy, and chemical companies. So the theory says he potentially had some secrets that he maybe shouldn't have had. It was also reported that he might have had access to bank accounts that belonged to Saddam Hussein. So was Saad killed to silence him and what he knew? Was Saad even potentially meeting with Sylvain to arrange some sort of transfer of information or even a sale? And if Sylvain was the target, it's a little unclear as to why, as he seemed to be just a regular local father of 3 who worked as a welder in a workshop. But government covers do exist. So the last major theory was that this was just the crazed work of a lone gunman or even a serial killer, as there didn't really seem to be any super obvious motive for the killings, and the gun that was used was later determined to be a pre-World War II Luger pistol, which was very unlikely to be used in a professional killing. There have been a few arrests since the incident, but all were eventually released, and whether this was a crime over inheritance, a calculated attack involving nuclear secrets, or just the mad actions of a lone gunman? We may never know. Antoinette Cayedito was a 9-year-old girl who went missing in 1986. This was in New Mexico, and Antoinette was a smart, responsible kid who, by the time she was 6, was cooking for her younger sisters, cleaning and ironing their clothes for the week, and just generally taking incredible care of them. She was described as having a caregiver's heart. Her favorite color was purple, and she was nicknamed Squirrel. So she was not only an incredible kid, but an incredible human. And on that fateful April night, Antoinette's mother, Penny, went to sleep, and when she woke up at 7 a.m., Antoinette was missing. Penny contacted the police, and a search was started. Antoinette's sister, Wendy, actually gave her own account of what happened that night, and she told detectives that there was a knock on the door, and Penny, the mother, had told Antoinette to go and answer it. This was at around 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. And when she answered it, 2 men, one of whom went by Uncle Joe, grabbed her as she was kicking and screaming and forced her into a brown van. And that was it. This version of events differs quite dramatically to the account that Penny initially gave, and after further questioning, Penny said that she had told Antoinette to go and answer the door, and she laid there for about 30 or 40 minutes, but Antoinette never came back. She got up to see where she was, and she couldn't find her. So that whole finding her missing at 7 a.m. when she woke up was apparently complete rubbish, and we may never have found that out if it weren't for Antoinette's sister. Then, 8 years later, Penny actually confessed to having been involved in Antoinette's disappearance. She asked, "What if I did this? Would I go to prison?" She stated that she and a man had gotten together to make a plan for the abduction. She said she wanted to know where the abduction would take place, but was told it was better if she didn't know. She admitted to knowing who was coming to take Antoinette, as well as having told Antoinette to answer the door that morning. Despite this confession, she was never charged with anything relating to Antoinette's disappearance, and sadly to this day, Antoinette has never been found. There were numerous apparent sightings of Antoinette over the years, with one account of a little girl matching her description, leaving a note in a restaurant saying, "Help me, call the police." 1 year after her disappearance, the local police got a phone call from a frantic young girl claiming to be Antoinette. She said she was in Albuquerque, but before the call could be traced, an adult voice was heard shouting, "Who said you can use the phone?" before the girl screamed and the phone call ended. Penny believed the voice to be that of her daughter, but said she didn't recognize the adult voice. And sadly, Antoinette has not been seen since. Anthropocene is a proposed geological epoch or period, starting from the time that humans had a significant impact on Earth's geology and ecosystems. It comes from the root word anthropos, meaning human, and was first proposed by Vladimir Vernadsky in 1938. Proposed start times for this period range from the agricultural revolution, so about 12 to 15,000 years ago, to as recently as the 1960s. The idea is that humans have so massively affected the Earth and its ecosystems that this should be its own period. Neither the International Commission for Stratigraphy nor the International Union of Geological Sciences has officially accepted or implemented this term or period, but it's possible they might start in the future. The Area 51 caller. So quite a few years before people like Alex Jones really became popular, there was a talk show host called Art Bell, who ran a late-night conspiracy theory radio show called Coast to Coast AM. He often discussed unknowns or mysteries in the universe, and would often take calls from various viewers. One morning in 1997, Bell took a call from a man who claimed to have previously worked in Area 51. He is widely known simply as the Frantic Man, because he was frantic. He sounded scared and panicked, saying that he didn't have much time and that they were going to triangulate his position. But I will just let you listen to it for yourself.
This is Coast to Coast AM, the largest live overnight talk radio program in America. Isn't that amazing? Online, you're on the air. Hello.
Hello, Art.
Yes.
Hi. I don't have a whole lot of time.
Well, look, let's begin by finding out whether you're using this line properly or not.
Area 51.
Yeah, that's right. Were you an employee or are you now?
A former employee.
Former employee.
I was let go on a medical discharge about a week ago, and I've kind of been running across the country. Oh man, I don't know where to start. They're gonna they'll triangulate on this position really, really soon.
So you can't spend a lot of time on the phone. So give us something quick.
Okay, okay, what we're thinking of as aliens are, they're extra-dimensional beings that an earlier precursor of the space program made contact with. They are not what they claim to be. They have infiltrated a lot of aspects of the military establishment, particularly the Area 51. The disasters that are coming, the military, the government knows about them, and there's a lot of safe areas in this world that they could begin moving the population to now, Art.
But they're not doing anything.
They are not. They want the major population centers wiped out so that the few that are left will be more easily controllable. I started getting...
And suddenly, halfway through the call, the line dropped. Not only did the call cut out, which might have been a prank by the caller, but the entire station suddenly, mysteriously was forced offline, and they had to reset the station onto a backup system. Nothing like this had ever happened before in the station's history. And a few months after this call, the same man apparently called back again, saying that everything was fine, the original call was just a prank, a hoax, but the caller's voice now sounded slightly different, and the different tones and mannerisms of the guy seemed to call into question whether this was the same man that had called originally months earlier. Whether you believe in conspiracies or not, whether you believe in aliens or not, you have to admit that this caller's emotions and fear definitely seemed genuine, and it was awfully strange timing for the entire station to shut down, precisely when the caller was about to reveal who knows what. Atmospheric jellyfish are these floating jellyfish seen in the night sky all across the world. They look a little like UFOs, a little like actual space jellyfish, and NASA says they are apparently space debris reflecting off the northern lights, apparently. Some of the more notable sightings have been in the Netherlands, China, and Russia, but no proof as to their actual nature has ever been put forward. Badajoz UFO incident. This refers to an incident that happened in Badajoz, Spain, 1965. Two soldiers were patrolling a fuel storage area of the Badajoz base when they heard a noise similar to radio interference. They followed the noise and eventually it became a loud, high-pitched whistling, and the whistling stopped after about 5 minutes, and then they saw a large, intense, bright light in the sky, and after a few minutes the light faded. By this point, another soldier had arrived with a guard dog, and the dog ran straight for an area that was emitting a sound, but soon after the dog returned sick and scared, and the dog wouldn't leave the sight of the men, even after being instructed to. The dog just circled the 3 soldiers, which is a technique taught to the dog to protect the men when there is danger nearby. Suddenly, one of the soldiers saw a 3-meter tall being, human-shaped, incredibly bright, with very long arms and legs, and the soldier who saw this immediately fainted. The other 2 soldiers opened fire on this creature, firing around 40 or 50 bullets in total, and the bullets just made the creature shine even brighter, until after a while it faded into darkness. Then after a while the radio interference was heard again, and that was it. The entire base was searched the next morning, and what they found was incredibly weird. No bullet casings were found, nor were there any bullet holes in the walls near where the creature was. But the Air Force did say that the machine guns were indeed fired that night, and still to this day there has been no official answer regarding what the soldiers saw and what they fired at that night or where it came from. Banksy is the name of an anonymous street artist, originally from Bristol, England, whose real name and identity has remained a mystery for many, many years. Banksy started up in the 1990s, and while his early pieces were freehand, he said that one time while he was hiding from police under a rubbish truck, he noticed a stenciled serial number. So from that, he got the inspiration to stencil his work instead, and soon discovered it to be a faster, more efficient method of graffiti. Most of his pieces are hard-hitting and provocative, yet beautiful. Banksy said he was inspired by 3D, who is a graffiti artist and founding member of the band Massive Attack. And it's been theorized that maybe 3D himself is Banksy. It was also thought that Banksy could perhaps be the former host of the ITV Kids program Art Attack, who is Neil Buchanan, and this would be absolutely epic and hilarious if it were actually true. But the strongest guess for the identity of Banksy is a man called Robin Gunningham. He is a graffiti artist who was born and grew up in Bristol, and apparently several of Gunningham's former friends and schoolmates and acquaintances have said that he is Banksy, with one even accidentally referring to Banksy as Rob in an interview. So while Banksy's identity remains technically a mystery, there is a fair amount of speculation and evidence for who he really is. The Big Muddy Monster was a creature first spotted in 1973, Murfreesboro, Illinois. At around midnight, Andy Needham and Judy Johnson were parked up near the Big Muddy River where they noticed a foul smell. As they turned around and looked out of the car's window, they saw a huge 7-foot monster staring right back at them. The creature was covered in white hair and mud and looked like it was possibly related to the Bigfoot. It had glowing red eyes, yellow teeth, and so the pair quickly drove away and filed a police report. Police investigated the area the next day and found what appeared to be large, narrow footprints. Later that same day, 2 other people reported seeing a monster on their parents' farm, which they described as 7 to 8 feet tall, 300 plus pounds, pale with dirty white hair, standing on 2 feet and emitting a musky odor. So after these sightings, the police chief decided to try and hunt down the creature. He took a group of men and search dogs and tracked the creature to an abandoned barn. As they approached the barn, the dogs stopped barking and refused to go inside. So the men went inside, but they said they failed to find the monster. The creature has been seen multiple times since then, one time with a couple even firing at the creature, then retreating into a small office as the creature banged on the walls of the office for over half an hour. The town has sort of a love-hate relationship with this monster now. On one hand, they are a teeny tiny bit scared, and on the other hand, they simply accept it as part of the town and its lore, painting murals of it and telling stories of its sightings. So whether you believe it or not, the Big Muddy Monster does live on, at least in the lore of Murfreesboro. The body in the cylinder refers to the body of a man who was found in a partially sealed steel cylinder on a bomb site in 1945 England. It is believed that the body was there in the pipe undisturbed for around 60 years. The cylinder or pipe was a large tubular steel tube, and it was thought to be perhaps something like a ventilation shaft. In 1943, while clearing a church full of rubble and debris, bulldozers discovered and moved this cylinder and accidentally sealed it shut. So one side of the cylinder was actually sealed shut with a steel cap, and the other side of it was open-ended until it was crimped shut by the bulldozer. So this basically completely sealed it shut except for a 4-inch gap. And over the next few years, as kids tend to do, they played with the thing, pushing it up and down the street, rolling it around. Then 2 years later, one of the kids decided to try and see what was inside the tube, and eventually he saw what looked like parts of a skeleton. Police were called and they cut open the cylinder with a torch, revealing a complete human skeleton along with what seemed to be personal belongings. This man would have been around 6 feet tall when he was alive and between 25 and 50 years old. He seemed to have died due to suffocation after crawling into the pipe, and was actually using a brick wrapped in a sheet as a pillow. He was fully clothed in a later Victorian outfit, and alongside the man were 2 diaries dated 1884 and 1885, but both of the diaries were largely illegible. They also found a postcard, a handkerchief, a brooch, and a gold signet ring with a red and green stone that carried the hallmark London 1859. Later that year, they named T T.C. Williams as the potential identity for the body, based on some notes from the diaries. In 1885, T.C. Williams was a paint and brush manufacturer in Liverpool and had declared bankruptcy just a year earlier. So what likely happened is he had to declare bankruptcy, leave his home, and essentially sleep in a ventilation pipe, possibly on the work of his premises. But somehow the pipe became sealed and he suffocated to death. There was no inquiry into his death in 1885, as the body wasn't found, and they likely just thought that he had skipped town in order to escape the debt collectors. But the exact details of this case are likely just lost to time. Brianna Maitland was a 17-year-old girl who went missing in 2004, Vermont. The circumstances of her death were kind of strange, and she was acting a little odd on the day of her disappearance, on that fateful spring night. So a few weeks before her disappearance, Brianna was attacked at a party by a former friend, Keely Lacrosse. This was apparently due to Brianna interacting with a guy at the party, which made Keely jealous. And from this attack, she received a broken nose and a concussion. Ouch. On this particular morning, Brianna took an exam and then spent the day with her mother celebrating. She was out with her mum shopping and doing errands, and while in the checkout line of a store, something or someone outside caught Brianna's attention, and she went out, leaving her mother in the line. When her mum came out, Brianna seemed visibly shaken, unnerved, and agitated, and told her mum that she had to go home and prepare for her evening shift. Her mum said she didn't really want to pry, so she just left it at that. So Brianna completed her shift at the Black Lantern Inn and clocked out at around 11:20 in the evening. According to all the eyewitnesses of that night, Brianna then got into her car alone and went to drive home. But that would be the last time that she was ever seen. Police found her car the next day, forcibly reversed into the side of an old abandoned house about a mile from her work. But she wasn't reported missing until 5 days later, as I guess she was known for not really responding straight away and for not always being home, and the police who found her car just assumed it was a drunk driver that had crashed the car and left the scene, which doesn't really make sense to me, and it's kind of wild that the police wouldn't try and locate or contact Brianna after this. Initially it was thought that she might have run away, but after finding some essential items like her ATM cards and medication, the police suspected foul play and thought that she had possibly been abducted by multiple people. A week later, the police received an anonymous tip saying that Brianna was being held against her will in a house about 10 miles away. This house was rented by two known drug dealers, Ramon Ryans and Nathaniel Charles Jackson, and it was raided by police soon after receiving this tip. The men were arrested for their possession of drugs in the house, but no sign of Brianna was found. And some of Brianna's friends said that she had actually experimented with some drugs, and she did know Ryans and Jackson. Then the police received another tip with a signed affidavit that said in graphic detail how the two men had taken Maitland, murdered her, dismembered her, and disposed of her remains on a pig farm. This was apparently all over a money dispute that the two men had with Brianna, but the police say that they were unable to corroborate these claims. The family has received quite a few anonymous phone calls claiming that Brianna is tied to a tree or at the bottom of a lake or something, but none have ever panned out, and still to this day, Brianna is a missing person. Chase's vaults moving coffins. So this is an interesting legend about a burial vault in a church in Barbados. According to the legend, each time this heavily sealed marble vault was opened for the burial of a family member, all of the lead coffins had changed position. These were incredibly heavy lead coffins, and so moving them would take a considerable amount of force, or ghost power. This legend was first published in 1833 and told of these coffins as far back as 1808. These stories were never really and could never really be verified, but it is an interesting legend nonetheless. Christopher Case was the strange unsolved case of Christopher Case. He was 35 years old in 1991 and lived in Seattle. He worked for a radio broadcaster and was a fairly well-liked man. And while on a trip down to San Francisco for a work conference, Christopher met a woman that he really liked and clicked with. They talked for hours, and when the woman eventually decided to make a move on Christopher, he declined. This seemed to really upset the lady, and she became angry, saying that she was going to curse him time, and that he would be dead within the week, which seems like a bit of an overreaction, but maybe she just hadn't gotten any in a while. This apparently really upset Christopher, and he started calling friends, venting, and asking what he should do. He spoke to his psychic friend about curses, witchcraft, everything occult, and then ended the phone call. Fast forward about a week, and authorities were called to Christopher's apartment for a wellness check, and what they found was shocking. There were lines of salt along the base of each wall in the apartment, several crucifixes, and about a dozen burnt down candles. And the most shocking of all, they found Christopher dead in the bathtub. He had died from a heart attack or a curse made to look like a heart attack. Curses can be a little sneaky like that. And so this is where the case ended. And it all really comes down to whether you believe witches and curses exist or don't. In one case, the lady likely did put a death curse on him that he wasn't quite able to shake off. Or in the other case, Chris just scared himself silly, and in his hyper paranoid state led to either a shock when he got into the bath, which led to a heart attack, or carbon monoxide poisoning from all the candles lit inside the apartment. Who knows? The Cup of Idiocy was a short film made up mainly of skits by Doug Walker, better known as the Nostalgia Critic. This was a home movie made in 1991, and it contained skits such as the Battle of Stupidity, Pointless Moments, the Unfit Firing Squad, a ribbon show, Late Late So Late It's Early show, and The Last Man on Earth. This short film was thought lost forever until in 2010, Doug found a flash drive that may potentially contain Cup of Idiocy. We don't actually know if it did or not, and if Doug does have the full film somewhere, it doesn't look like he's intent on releasing it. Dick Hansen was a former college football star who had a strange fatal encounter one April night in 1991. After going out for drinks in San Jose, California, he and his friend Gene left the bar in Gene's car at 1 a.m. They then drove to the restaurant where Dick had parked his car. While the two were parked up there, another car pulled up behind them. The mysterious man stayed in his car until Dick had gotten into his car, and when Dick and Gene drove off, so did the man right behind them. When they arrived at a set of traffic lights, they noticed that this man was following behind them very closely, as they made several left turns and changed lanes multiple times. This was starting to scare them. After a while, Gene pulled up beside Dick and asked him to go to the police. Dick apparently must not have heard her, and so they drove on for a while longer, with this guy close behind them. Eventually, Dick stopped his car, got out and went back to the man. Dick asked him what he wanted, shouted at the guy, and then Dick was shot. Twice. The man sped off, and Dick was dead by the time the paramedics arrived. The man apparently had the stature of a football player, and with Gene's number plate being 49R Hugs, which was a reference to the San Francisco 49ers, it was thought that this mysterious man might have been a fanatical fan of a rival team, but that's about as far as they got with this one, and to this day, the case remains unsolved. The Deat of Pass incident. Well, how the turns have tabled. So this was actually one of the first cases that I covered on this channel. Granted, my quality has gotten quite a bit better since then, but it was still a great case to cover nonetheless. In 1959, a group of 9 young but highly experienced hikers died mysteriously in the northern Ural Mountains, Russia. The hiking group was led by a man called Igor Dyatlov, who was a fantastic friend, leader, human, and hiker. The route they took was fairly usual, with only 1 or 2 minor detours, and according to their diaries, they were in fairly high spirits at the time and not really in any danger at all. That is, until February 1st, about a week into their hike, when they were suddenly forced out of their tent in the middle of the night by someone or something, either terrifying, powerful, or both. Due to them having to flee so suddenly, they were mostly severely underclothed, and they all died shortly afterwards, at least in part from hypothermia. Now, that is the shortened factual series of events, but the main mystery in this case is what exactly caused the group to flee. There wasn't really any sign of an avalanche, and the tent had been madly cut from the inside. This group was very experienced, so they had to know that leaving their tent in the middle of the night like they did, with very little gear on, one would likely be a death sentence. But they somehow decided that the danger of the elements out there was less than the danger that they were currently facing. They fled the tent, got to the bottom of the slope, and lit a small fire in the forest below. But it was sadly inadequate to heat the entire group, and so some of them died there, surrounded by the trees. Some died just a short distance away, having been crushed either by collapsing snow or by a powerful creature or beast. The others were found in between the fire and the tent, implying that they had maybe made some attempt to get back to the tent before succumbing to the cold. There are a few theories about this one, including but not limited to government tests, a Yeti attack, radiation madness, aliens, rogue criminals, and of course just natural causes. But there are many little details in this case, all pointing in seemingly different directions. So if you want a full in-depth version of this case, I would recommend you check out my earlier video and leave a comment there saying that you are in fact a time traveler. So without further ado, grab a drink. My choice today is plain English tea, and join me as we explore the unsolved mystery Iceberg. So to start off with, we have Evil Stick. In 2014 Ohio, Nicole Allen bought her 2-year-old daughter a cute toy as a gift from a Halloween store. This toy was a princess wand topped with petals, suitable for ages 3 and up, which sounds lovely. It appeared to be a fairly standard, cheap, kind of cute toy, and it looked so unremarkable that Nicole didn't even notice the name printed along the top of the box of the toy, which was Evil Stick. And when she got it home, the reason for the name on the toy became quite apparent. Instead of playing beautiful music as the packaging suggested, when the button on the wand was pressed, a crazy evil laugh played, and the flower on the wand actually lit up, revealing a horrifying image of a bloodied woman with no pupils, attacking herself quite viciously. The princess on the packaging is a character from Cardcaptor Sakura, which was a late 90s manga and animated series, but the designer and creator of this toy is for the most part unknown. It was thought obviously to be some kind of counterfeit product, and when Nicole brought the toy back to the Halloween store, the store owner pointed out where in the store Nicole could find more of these toys. She went over there and lo and behold, there was an entire rack of these evil sticks, but not all of them contained the same image. There were some that had a zombie type of character on them, but most of them were just straight up anime and manga characters, and they weren't scary or gory at all. In fact, most of them were apparently quite lovely. So the photos in each toy seemed to be placed almost at random, and it was simply luck of the draw as to whether one would get a cute, cool anime character or the horrifying, evil, potentially scarring image of this woman, which is even worse when you consider that these toys were apparently made for ages 3 and up. The photo itself was traced back to a horror photographer's website, Butcher Ludwig, which, if Butcher is actually his name, that was an incredible choice to become a horror photographer. The photo was taken from his website without his permission, and whoever designed the toy gave the model these demonic pupilless eyes, which she doesn't have in the original photo. The manufacturing of this toy was traced back to a particular factory in China, but that is as far as it ever got. And so whoever made these evil sticks, why they were so randomized and gory when they were made for young children, is to this day a complete mystery. The female stranger refers to an unnamed woman who died in 1816 and was buried in St. Paul Cemetery, Virginia. The tomb and grave of this woman contains a poem or inscription or tale, however you look at it, and reads as follows: "To the memory of a female stranger whose mortal sufferings terminated on the 14th day of October 1816, aged 23 years and 8 months. This stone is placed here by her disconsolate husband, in whose arms she sighed out her latest breath, and who, under God, did his utmost even to soothe the cold dead ear of death. How loved, how valued, once avails thee not, to whom related, or by whom begot. A heap of dust alone remains of thee, 'tis all thou art, and all the proud shall be. To him gave all the prophets witness, that through him whosoever believeth in him shall receive remissions of sins. Acts 10th chapter, 43rd verse. Who exactly this lady was isn't entirely clear, but a few theories and testimonies suggest that she possibly could have been an American diplomat, a noble Englishwoman with a star-crossed lover who ran away together in the name of love. And while a lot of these stories are great as well, stories, there doesn't seem to be much factual evidence supporting them, and so the true identity of the female stranger remains a mystery. The Flatwoods Monster was a creature seen in Flatwoods, West Virginia in 1952. On that dark September night, a bright light crossed the night sky. Tommy Hyer and Edward and Fred May then saw the bright object cross the sky and land down in a nearby farm. The boys then ran and told one of their mothers, Kathleen May, and together with a few other local kids and a West Virginia National Guardsman, they all went down to this farm to try and locate what it was that they saw. The group reached a hill on the farm, and one of the kids saw a pulsing red light, so the guardsman pointed his flashlight at the red light and saw a tall man-like figure with a round red face surrounded by a pointed hood-like shape. It was apparently around 10 feet or 3 meters tall, had greenish, orangish glowing eyes, a dark black body, and small hand-like claws. The creature then made a hissing noise and glided down towards the group when Lemon, the guardsman, screamed and dropped his torch, causing the entire group to flee in terror. The group said they smelt a pungent mist during the encounter, and a few of them actually felt nauseated, but that was the first and last time the Flatwoods Monster was ever seen. Friedrich Valentik. This was an Australian pilot who disappeared in somewhat suspicious, strange circumstances while on a 232 kilometers training flight in a light aircraft over the Bays Strait. While on this flight, Friedrich radioed the Melbourne Flight Service to report that he was being followed by an unidentified aircraft at 4,500 feet. He was told by the flight service that there was no known traffic at that level, and Friedrich said he could see a large aircraft which was being illuminated by 4 bright lights. He was unable to confirm further details about the craft, but said that it was following about 1,000 feet above him and had a shiny metal surface with green lights. Friedrich then said that he was experiencing engine difficulties, and when asked to identify the craft, he said it's not an aircraft, before his transmission was cut out by a metallic scraping noise, and all contact of Friedrich and his plane were lost. An air and sea search were obviously started, but sadly they were unsuccessful, and Friedrich and his plane were never found. Theories for this one are kind of wild. Friedrich's track record for flying wasn't incredible, and so some people think he may have become disoriented while flying at night and started flying upside down, and so saw the reflection of his own lights in the water below or above. This might also explain the engine troubles he was having, as flying this type of aircraft upside down for extended periods of time apparently causes quite severe engine issues. And strangely enough, the actual reason for Friedrich's flight that night seems to be unclear as well. He told different people different reasons for why he was flying, that he was going to pick up some friends from King's Island, or that he was flying out to pick up crayfish, both of which turned out to be untrue. And he also failed to inform the King Island airport of his plans to land there that evening. And some theories said that the overhead lights might have been Venus, Mars, Mercury, and Antares, which seems like a wild theory to me. And there was also a report of a mysterious light aircraft landing not far from where Valentik disappeared, and at around the same time, leading some people to believe that he just staged his disappearance for whatever reason and just started a fresh life somewhere. Friedrich himself was an ardent believer in UFOs, and there are of course those out there who believe that he was either abducted or attacked that night, but the definitive answer is still unclear. Ghost rockets are these strange rocket-like ghostly figures that were spotted in the skies of Finland and Sweden in 1946. Around 2,000 sightings were made, and investigators say that these were likely meteors, as the sightings were mostly around August, and these fell within the peak annual Perseid meteor shower. Another theory was that these were missile tests by the Soviets in the German rocket facility Peenemünde, and I'm probably completely butchering that pronunciation. This was obviously just after World War II, so it would make a little bit of sense. And although some meteorite debris was found at some of the sightings, the exact explanation and identity of these sightings is still yet to be determined. The giant shrimp in the laundry room is not a clever guess for a game of Cluedo, but rather a terrible creature, first spotted by Virginia Staples in 1948 Washington. Virginia was living in an apartment on Denny Street, Bremerton, when she went down into the large basement to hang her clothes on the clothesline, which, is that something people even do? Hang clothes in a basement? But anyway, in this basement, there were a bunch of large, eerie holes in the wall that were rumored to lead to the waters in the nearby Puget Sound. So, as she was down there hanging her clothes, she got this eerie, creepy feeling that she was being watched somehow. So, she quickly turned around, and what she saw completely froze her. She said in one of the holes stood this thing, 5 feet tall, bright orange, with little thin spidery legs and antennae. She immediately ran upstairs, left the house, and went to Seattle to live with a relative, which is pretty dramatic. Sometime later, she visited an aquarium to try and get some better idea of what she saw that day, and the closest thing that she could find was this little tiny shrimp, which that's just 3 different words for small. She said that nobody would believe her story, but with God as her witness, it did really happen. Interestingly enough, in recent years, state lawmakers have actually attempted to pass bills recognizing Bigfoot as the official state cryptid, which I didn't even know that was a thing. I'm glad lawmakers are spending time and money on important things like this. But fans of the now named Shrimpy argued that it would be a much better representative of the local community. So, all hail Shrimpy. Grave robbing for morons. So this one is incredibly creepy, bizarre, insane. It was part of a strange, dark, 4-part home movie collection that circulated in the underground DVD market in the early days of, and even before, the internet. There was a film recorded on DVD called Insuring Your Place in Hell, which just sounds absolutely cheery. The first volume of this is not known to have survived anywhere, but the second volume is strange enough to make up for that. It is a compilation video made up of 4 different home movies, each one being stranger than the last. Firstly, we have Cooking with Huck Botko, which features a young man making baked goods for certain family members that he less than likes. And as you can imagine, he included some horrific ingredients in these baked goods, such as roadkill and certain bodily fluids. This video was later determined to be an art project by a young aspiring video maker, who later would actually go on to work in Hollywood, actually writing the screenplay for the last Exorcism film, which came out just a few years ago. The second video was named Exploding Varmints, and featured, well, exploding varmints. Pretty gruesome stuff. They also made a sequel, as I guess the first one was just that popular. The third was titled Mortuary of the Dead, and features a couple of young men exploring what seems to be a third world mortuary, complete with numerous corpses. Really creepy one. And that brings us to the fourth video, Grave robbing for morons. This video features a young man from New York, judging by his accent, with longish hair, somewhat sticking out ears, and quite a noticeable stutter. The video starts kind of mid-sentence or even mid-thought, and this young man, for 27 straight minutes, explains and gives tips and advice on grave robbing. He seems to be caked in either mud or dried blood, and explains how to remove the bones from a body, including the skull, where to sell the bones to and for how much, and how to not get caught while doing all of this. The identity of the guy and his friends behind the camera has never been figured out, and he has never been recognized or discovered. And for this one, there are a range of theories and questions. When was this even recorded? Judging by the clothes and the background items and quality of the film, it seems like it was made sometime in the late 80s, early 90s, but some people have questioned this, saying that they could have used props and fake clothes. I mean, all clothes are real, but, you know, wore certain clothes that were popular in the 80s to make it look like it was back then. And they could have just filmed the whole thing on an old video camera, but just due to how consistent everything is, this seems quite unlikely, as you wouldn't expect just a bunch of kids to have this level of detail, but it's always a slim possibility, I guess. Then there was the question of whether this was genuine advice given by an actual grave robber, or if it was just a bunch of kids trying to seem edgy and cool and creating this hoax in the process, and that's kind of a hard one to figure out. Some of the advice in the video seems silly and absurd, like always get laid before you go grave robbing, as it triggers some chemical reaction in your body that gives you energy to run away faster if you're actually caught, and to knock out any guards that might discover you, so that when they wake up they think that it was just a dream. Which I think these things don't necessarily even disprove the theory that these were actually grave robbers, as if they were kids that were genuinely grave robbing, they might also go along with and come up with these silly, absurd pieces of information and advice. And the skull in the video looks extremely real. It even has a realistic jaw and removable teeth, which, if this was just a bunch of kids messing around and they somehow bought a fake skull, it is highly unlikely that they would pay this much attention to the details of it. Then there's the main kid or presenter himself, who keeps up this acting or stuttering or character for a full 27 minutes. And later on in the video, he seems to start to identify himself as Anthony Cass something, as he stops midway through his last name, thinking it wise not to reveal that in the video.
This was made by Anthony Cass. Well, as a matter of fact, let's forget the last name.
And as I said earlier, there have been many attempts to try and identify this guy, but they've ultimately all been unsuccessful. Who this kid is, when and where he recorded the video, who his friends were, and most importantly, whether the video was actually real or not, remain to this day a mystery. The Harris County Jane Doe was an unidentified woman killed by Samuel Little in the 1970s or in 1993. One of those two. It's a little unclear. Between 1970 and 2005, Samuel Little killed up to 93 women, many of whom were sex workers or suffered from addiction problems. This guy was an absolute monster and was convicted of 8 different murders in 3 different states and was linked to at least 61 more. Samuel said he picked this woman up from the side of a road, strangled her, and then dumped her body out afterwards. And even though her body was never found, apparently his confessions are said to be credible, so they're just taking his word for it, I guess. But either way, the identity of this Jane Doe remains a mystery. The Heartbeat in the Brain is a strange, disturbing documentary made by and about Amanda Fielding, who was a British scientist and artist in the 1970s. Trepanation is the ancient and extremely dangerous and stupid pseudo-medical procedure of cutting into someone's skull in hopes of relieving pressure and curing certain ailments or achieving a higher state of consciousness. And I shouldn't have to say this, but obviously don't try this at home. She was obsessed with this procedure, and after failing to find a doctor who would carry out the procedure for her, she decided that she would perform it on herself. The film documented the before, during, and after of the procedure, and was shown publicly in a 1978 screening at the Sidham Gallery in New York, in which at least one of the audience members fainted. The film was thought to be completely lost, but several snippets have been recovered over the years, so the film remains partially found, but still incredibly stupid. Ina Jane Doe. This was a previously unidentified woman found dead in Illinois 1993. Only her head was ever recovered, which was found in a wooded area in Wayne Fitzgerald National Park. It was thought that her head was probably thrown out of a moving car, traveling along a road inside the park. Her cause of death was undetermined, but as of 2022, she was officially identified as Susan Lund, a lady from Tennessee who went missing months earlier. The Indonesian lost Pygmy tribesman. So this one is kind of wild and comes with a creepy accompanying video. This video was taken by a group of bikers in a remote area of northern Sumatra, Indonesia. It seems to show a strange, tiny, half-naked man carrying a stick or spear. He jumps out of the bushes, startling the bikers, then runs from them as they chase him, then darts off into the brush, never to be seen again. It is thought that this could be a member of the mythical Mantis tribe, which is a lost Pygmy tribe said to be forest dwellers in Indonesia. The tribesmen are said to be smaller than the average man and flee when confronted, and the only record of them was in the 17th century, when 2 Manti tribesmen were apparently captured and presented to the captor's leader. Most people think the Manti people are simply a legend, but honestly, this video seems pretty convincing and terrifying to me. The ivory-billed woodpecker is a bird thought to be long extinct. The last proper evidence of its existence was almost 80 years ago, but according to Michael Collins, the ivory-billed woodpecker still exists. Between 2005 and 2013, he spent his free time kayaking into the swamps of the Pearl River with a camera. After 500 visits and roughly 1,500 hours, he produced this, which, yes, not very convincing. This photo is apparently proof that the ivory-billed woodpecker still exists, but to me, it just kind of looks like a blur, and honestly, it could probably just be any bird at all. This is simply a bird that's extremely difficult to find, he said. It's pretty clear that if you compare this with a typical species, the expected waiting time to get a clear photograph is millions of times greater. So that's just fantastic. But hopefully we'll snap a shot of the old bird in the next few million years. If we're lucky, it might even be before the heat death of the universe. One can dream. The Jack Fro's Mystery. So Jack Fro's was a 32-year-old man who died suddenly in 2011. 5 months after his death, his best friend Tim Hart received an email from Fro's account. The email was titled, "I'm watching. Did you hear me? I'm at your house. Clean your fucking attic." Tim was stunned when he read this. Before Fro's had died, he and Tim had been up in Tim's attic discussing what to do with all of that space. They were completely alone when this happened, and no one else knew about their time up there or what they talked about. Fro's cousin, Jimmy McGraw, received an email from Fro's at the same time saying, "I knew you were going to break your ankle. Tried to warn you, gotta be careful." Jimmy had broken his ankle about a week before this, which was long after Fro's had died, and they never really found out if these emails were genuinely from Fro's beyond the grave, or if they were a prank set up by somebody. But Tim said, "If someone is messing around, I don't care. I take it for what I want," which, I'll be honest, is a fantastic attitude to have. Japan's missing centenarians. This one is kind of mind-blowing. In 2010, police found the mummified corpse of Sogun Kato in his apartment, still lying in his bed 30 years after he had died. He was actually believed to be Japan's oldest man, 111 at the time, but in actual fact, his daughter had hid his death and kept it a secret for the last 30 years. After this shocking discovery, local governments sent out teams of people to check on some of their elderly citizens. Fusa Fuyara, who was Tokyo's oldest woman at 113, hadn't been seen by her daughter since the 1980s. One woman, said to be 125 years old, was registered as living in a park in Kobe City, and one resident of the Yamaguchi prefecture was listed as being 186 years old, but could not be located located. And these were not isolated cases either due to poor record keeping or to foul play similar to the original case that we discussed. There were more than 230,000 centenarians, which is people over 100 years old, who were essentially missing. Some were thought to have died in World War II or to have simply left Japan without telling anyone, and as such the records weren't updated. Japan's health minister has suggested a face-to-face meeting with all citizens over 110 years old to verify that they actually exist, and after what I've read on this entry, I don't think that would be such a terrible idea. Jeff the Killer's lost unedited image. So Jeff the Killer is this creepypasta image of a character that looks and feels so 2000s, and it probably is, as that's when it became popularized. This was on Newgrounds by Killer Jeff, hence the name of the character, Jeff the Killer. The first known appearance of the picture began with a Japanese media sharing site called fileman.n1e.jp, which just rolls off the tongue. This original image was an earlier edit of the later Jeff the Killer image and was tagged in Japanese with the fear of summer nights, as well as a certain celebrity before plastic surgery. It is thought that the original image might have come from a streamer on a website called Stickam, which was like a super early version of something like Omegle or Twitch. Apparently the girl posted a picture of her face, asking viewers to Photoshop it to make it prettier, and they did what kids on the internet do. Another photo was found on a Christian parody site, truechristian.com, back in 2005. The photo is of a woman simply known as Heather, but when contacted, she insisted she knew nothing about these edited photos. But I could totally see that being her, without all the horrific 2000s editing, of course. Judge Crater was an American lawyer who served on the New York State Supreme Court. He mysteriously vanished in 1930 after the state started an investigation into corruption. Before his disappearance, Crater withdrew a large amount of cash and had his clerk deliver 2 locked briefcases to his apartment, where he then told the clerk that he could take the rest of the day off. Crater went to a Broadway show, had dinner that night at Billy Haas's Chop House, then at 9:30 p.m. got into a taxicab and was never seen again. Detectives discovered that Crater's safety deposit boxes had been completely emptied, and the 2 briefcases that his clerk had delivered to his house were missing. He was known to liaise, shall we say, with showgirls, and 2 of his known favorite showgirls actually disappeared at the same time that he did. So personally, I think that he just jumped ship, took a private flight to a tropical island somewhere, and never came back. But either way, he was never seen again after that night, and in 1979 the case was officially closed. The Kung Fu Guy. So this is a really twisted, horrific case. In December of 1984, a young black man, now simply known as Kung Fu Guy, entered a dojo run by a man named Bobby Joe Blythe, or BJB for short. Now this BJB guy was known for being a bit of a thug. He was a violent homophobe who often threatened to stomp out any of his students that were found to be gay or lesbian. He of course used a different colorful word for them, and he was known for just brutally beating his students on several occasions, all of course in the name of learning and discipline. So in this video, the young man had already entered the dojo, and he asks to demonstrate some of his skills and techniques to the class. He says that he was trained by Jesus Christ and makes it clear that he does not want to fight, saying that he won't touch or hit his opponent, but simply demonstrate the techniques around them, not on them. They all agree to this, and when the demonstration starts, Kung Fu Guy's opponent kicks him. The Kung Fu Guy fights back, but is all the while peaceful and somewhat passive. He genuinely doesn't want to fight. His opponent keeps attacking him, and so he keeps attacking back and defending himself, until after a while BJB apparently gets tired of all this, and Kung Fu Guy is pushed back incredibly hard into a pole, which knocks him out, and Kung Fu Guy gets his head stomped on multiple times. The other students are actually the ones that stop the fight, and you can hear rattly, wheezy breathing coming from Kung Fu Guy.
Drag him out the back door. Drag him out the back door. Drag him out the back door. Take that, get that
known by some people as a death rattle, which happens when someone has a bad head, neck, or chest injury, but is still breathing. BJB then tells someone to drag him out to the back, later showing a trail of blood from where the guy was beaten to the back door. And that's where the video ends. It was for some reason posted up on BJB's YouTube channel. God only knows why he thought that would be a good idea. It has since been taken down, and the identity of Kung Fu Guy is still unknown. One police officer said to have apparently spoken to Kung Fu Guy, who confirmed that he was apparently okay. And most people agree that this video is real, although some do think it was a publicity stunt, and people are kind of torn on whether Kung Fu Guy is still alive or not. It is also rumored that BJB trained police in fighting and had certain military connections, so the attack and potential murder being covered up isn't entirely out of the question. In 2009, BJB made a post referencing Kung Fu Guy, but it has since been taken down along with all of his other videos and posts. If it was a fake, it's kind of strange that no one in authority has come forward and said explicitly that yes, this was a publicity stunt of some kind. The guy was an actor and everything is now fine. And to me, the breathing after the guy was knocked down is a lot of what convinces me that this video was actually real. As if you were faking something like this, you might just have the guy knocked out or something like that. You wouldn't include this eerie, terrifying gasping and breathing. But as I said, Kung Fu Guy was never identified, nor has BJB or any of his students ever been charged with assault or potential murder of this man. Lauria Bible and Ashley Freeman were two American teenagers who went missing in December 1999, Oklahoma. They were last seen in Ashley Freeman's family home, and at around 5:30 in the morning, firefighters were called to this same home. They extinguished the fires and found the dead bodies of Danny and Kathy Freeman, Ashley Freeman's parents. They had both been shot to death at close range, and police were unable to find any trace of the two teenage girls. Originally, just the mum was found, so it was thought that Danny, the dad, had maybe killed his wife and gone on the run with these two girls. But the next day, Danny's body was found in the fire, which obviously put an end to that theory. Over the next 10 years, two convicted killers would confess to these crimes, but they later recanted them and admitted that they had just confessed to these crimes in order to get rewards in prison. But they are convicted killers after all. What do you expect? In 2018, a man named Ronnie Busick, age 66, was arrested and charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder, with 2 other suspects being identified, Warren Welch II and David Pennington, who died in 2007 and 2015 respectively. There were apparently over a dozen witnesses who claimed that all 3 of the men bragged about killing the Freeman parents, which was apparently over drug money, and then kidnapping, assaulting, and killing the 2 teenage girls while keeping them in one of their trailers, and even taking Polaroid photos of the girls. But these Polaroids were never recovered. In 2020, Busick admitted to being an accessory to these crimes and to setting fire to the family home, and was sentenced to 15 years, with only 10 of those 15 to be served in prison. Like, what? He was released on May 19th, 2023, which that's like a 3-year sentence. And honestly, to me, the main mystery in this one is how in the hell he got such a low, pathetic sentence for crimes this horrific, even if he didn't actually kill anyone. Being an accessory to crimes this evil warrants, to me, a life sentence. Leigh Ochi was an American teenager who disappeared under mysterious circumstances from her home in Mississippi. This was in 1992 during Hurricane Andrew. On that fateful day, 13-year-old Leigh was home alone while her mother went off to work. At this time, Leigh's father actually lived in Virginia. Around 9 a.m, the mum was informed that a storm would be headed to her neighborhood, and so she called home to check on Leigh, but she received no answer. So she left work work and drove home, which was less than 2 miles away, and found the garage door open with the light on. She entered the home and found blood smeared on one of the walls. Then she went into Lay's bedroom and found the girl's favorite blanket crumpled up on the floor. She immediately called 911. Police found additional blood in several places around the house, with evidence that the suspect had tried to clean it up. They also found Lay's nightgown, which had been stained in blood. Lay's mother, father, and stepfather were all seen as suspects, but one by one were cleared and alibied. And searches in the local area for the girl all turned out to be fruitless. And that's basically where the trail ended, until 8 days after Lay disappeared. A package containing her glasses was mailed to the stepfather. The FBI then got involved and determined that water was used to seal the envelope instead of saliva, so they weren't able to get a DNA sample of it, unfortunately. And there was no ransom letter or anything else in the package besides the girl's glasses. Then there was a skull found in a nearby field that actually belonged to another missing person and not Lay. The mother apparently showed some signs of deception on her polygraph tests, although they were too unreliable to get any proper reading on them, so I don't think too much can be read into that. And she believes that a man named Oscar McKinley Kearns was responsible for Lay's death, as he was convicted of similar horrific crimes both before and after Lay's disappearance. But sadly, that is where the case currently sits. Long-delayed echoes were first observed in 1927 and are radio echoes that return to the sender several seconds after the original transmission has been sent out. So normally a radio echo is heard about 1/7 of a second after it's sent out, which is how long it takes for the radio signal to travel around the entire Earth. But Jorgen Hals observed several echoes between 2.7 and 30 seconds after his transmission. Where these echoes came from, what was emitting them, and why, if there even is a why, is still yet to be figured out. There have apparently been up to 15 possible natural explanations for this, and while most of the theories get very, very deep and scientific, they mostly involve things like looping around the Earth multiple times, or bouncing off the atmosphere or off of plasma clouds coming from the sun. Personally, I think the most logical explanation for this is, as always, aliens. So without further ado, grab a drink. My choice today is English tea, and join me as we explore the unsolved mystery Iceberg. So to start off with, we have the Maine penny. This was a Norwegian coin found in Maine, United States, 1957. It dates back to the reign of Olaf Kyrre, the king of Norway in the 11th century, which proves to some that the Viking people came to North America, specifically this far south, long before Columbus did, and potentially and likely engaged in trade with the local people. The silver coin was apparently found in 1957 on an old Native American settlement, along with roughly 30,000 other items, and it was donated to the Maine State Museum in 1974. The Marfa lights, also known as the Marfa ghost lights, are these mysterious lights frequently observed near Route 67 in Texas. People have attributed these lights to ghosts, aliens, spiritual creatures or beings, stuff like the will-o-wisp, which we explored in a previous episode, and the lights are described as distant spots of brightness that are not apparently attributable to headlights or ranch lights. These were first spotted in 1883, and still to this day there are multiple sightings each and every year. Mary Agnes Gross was a strange, disturbing case of a baby who went missing in 1962 Minnesota. A 20-year-old Marlis Thomas was pregnant and going into labor. She was quite heavily sedated, as it wasn't the smoothest of labors, shall we say, and Marlis remembers waking up, seeing her daughter, Mary Agnes Gross, for the first time. She apparently saw the baby moving, and then she passed out. When she woke up, she was alone in the room with the nurse, and when she asked to see her child, Mary, she was told that Mary had been alive for about an hour and then had tragically died. And when she was discharged and leaving the hospital, she actually asked to see Mary, and when they showed her Mary, she remembers later on thinking that Mary didn't look dead. She looked to be maybe sleeping or something. But at the time, Marilis didn't question it, and so she didn't press any further. Now, things in this one get very strange very quickly. When Marilis and her friend attended Mary's funeral, Marilis noticed that the baby that was in the casket looked in many ways different to the baby that they had shown her in the hospital. She had a different hair color and length, and she had a few different marks on her body. And when Marilis's mother, Clara, tried to take a photograph of the baby, the funeral director wouldn't allow it. So come the day of the burial, another completely bizarre thing happened, and that was the presence of another family at the burial site. At the exact same time, apparently mourning the death of another child. And later on, Marilis went back to the gravesite and noticed a completely different child's name on the gravestone, Pamela Ray Dickey. And when she questioned this, the cemetery confirmed to her that there was no records of Mary Agnes being buried on that day. The plot thickens. There was only a record of one funeral that day and one burial, Pamela Ray. Pamela had died only a few hours before Mary's supposed death, on the same day in the same hospital. And hospital records said that Mary was alive and well at birth, with a normal heart rate and normal color. But the death certificate said that she was dead on arrival, and that she had never even drawn her first breath, even though Marilis swore she saw her child moving and breathing. On top of all this, she had her death marked down as 6:20 p.m, 3 minutes before her birth at 6:23 p.m. So with all of these suspicious discrepancies going on, Marilis started to suspect that Mary didn't in fact die, and was still alive somewhere out there. She had Mary's grave exhumed, and DNA tests proved that the body that was buried there wasn't Mary's and wasn't even Pamela's, but belonged to a third unidentified baby girl. And whilst all this madness and mayhem was going on, Marilis received a photograph in the mail. There was no letter, no return address, no discernible identification, and no trace of who or where it came from. The photo was of a husband, a wife, 2 children, and 1 baby girl. The baby girl apparently looked like Mary's father, but Marilis didn't recognize anyone else in the photograph. So kind of a wild case, but theory suggests that Mary was actually taken by the hospital for some reason, and Marilis was told that Mary had died, and she had the funeral and burial, etc. There are some who accuse the hospital of human trafficking, and Marilis believes that because she was young and living alone, the hospital decided to take Mary from her and give her to a more responsible family, which is absolutely twisted if that is true. And the photograph that Marilis received could very well be someone taking pity on her, letting her know that yes, while you lost your child, she's still alive and safe and happy somewhere out there. Marilis died in 2012, never finding out the truth, but her children still believe that their sister is out there somewhere and are still seeking answers behind her birth and supposed death. Megan Curl was a 26-year-old worker at a chicken processing plant in Texas. She had mild learning difficulties and was apparently quite naive and constantly longed for attention. On March 25th, 2000, she was out at a local nightclub called the Electric Cowboy, where she was eventually asked to leave because of her provocative dancing, and witnesses saw her with an unidentified male who had apparently bought her 2 drinks. Megan then went home, and she and her neighbor and best friend, Tonya, were stood out on Tonia's balcony talking about the night and how it went, when suddenly a car came speeding down the road and came to a screeching halt just outside Megan's house. Megan said it was probably the guy from the club, and so she went down to speak with him. Tonya went back inside, and when she came out to check on Megan, she and the man from the club were both inside the car, apparently talking. Tonya again went inside, and when she came out to check later, the car was still there, but Megan and the man weren't. So she went to Megan's apartment to check on her, and she saw that the man from the car and club were in there with her. She said he was a friend from the club and that she was okay, and Tonya even double checked if she was okay, and Megan said that she was. So Tonya said goodnight and went back to her apartment. This was the last time that anyone would see Megan alive. At around 4 a.m, the fire department was called to Megan's house, and when they entered her apartment, her bedroom, but mainly her bed, had been set on fire. Megan's charred body was found tied to the bed, completely beyond recognition, with her throat slit multiple times, and a plastic bag placed over her head. The authorities in the end were only able to identify her with dental records. Authorities suspected that she was killed by someone she knew, and so naturally all of her exes and family were questioned, including an ex who had actually just gotten out of prison that week, but apparently he had quite a solid alibi. The main suspect to this day is this guy, who is the man from the car and the club. He has yet to be identified, and so this remains an unsolved case. Rochelle Robinson and Michael Johnston, aged 19 and 25, were two friends who were found horrifically murdered in 1994, Washington. They were both avid fans and players of Magic the Gathering, which is a fantasy card game, and after playing together one night at a friend's house, they left the friend's house in separate cars. Now, one important thing that came up in the case was that these two friends were in fact secret lovers and were having an affair, as Michael was actually married with 2 kids at the time. Police believe that after leaving the friend's house, Michael parked his car up somewhere and Rochelle picked him up sometime after 1 a.m. Then they parked on a quiet road dubbed by many in the area as Lover's Lane. They were completely alone for a while, engaging in coitus, when someone suddenly appeared, opened the back door, and found the pair having sex. They were apparently forced to dress quite quickly, as when Rochelle was found, she was wearing Michael's t-shirt inside out. Police believe that they were forced out of the car, likely at gunpoint. Michael was handcuffed and forced to kneel near the car, then shot, then had his throat slit, all in front of Rochelle. Rochelle then was likely held at knife point, as she had several shallow knife marks on her neck, and she was forced into the killer's car while he drove them to a remote road. He only drove for about 5 miles before stabbing her to death, slitting her throat, and leaving her on the side of the road covered in just a cardboard box. Some people believe that the killings were linked to dark occult activities, because the pair were Magic the Gathering players, which is such a 1980s thing to say, even though this wasn't the 1980s. Ex-lovers and family members were all investigated and eventually cleared, including Michael's wife and now widow, Janet. Rochelle did have some problems with a stalker who would often show up to her work and just watch her until she left. Her colleagues actually had to, on several occasions, ask the man to leave, and Rochelle said that she was worried that he might do something. So, to me, this guy seems like the most likely suspect, as he may very well have been obsessed with Rochelle and was jealous over her relationship with Michael. But he was never identified, and so to this day, these 2 murders remain a mystery. Missing Nazis' gold. So during the reign of the Nazis in Germany, they stole, looted, and accumulated billions of dollars in today's money worth of gold. They held this gold in various stores and banks around the world, with the Swiss National Bank being a major holder of this gold. Some of this gold was used to finance the war, but the amount they spent versus the amount they had doesn't match up 1-to-1, which means there was a ton of excess gold still in storage all around the world. And where a lot of this gold ended up and is today is a little unclear. There have been lawsuits brought and lost against the Vatican Bank, the Franciscan Order, and many others that accuse these parties of holding the Nazi gold just for safekeeping after the war, and then just forgetting about it and eventually keeping it. This accusation is apparently the same for all the banks around the world who held stores of the Nazis' gold. But to this day, even after all of the lawsuits, the whereabouts of a lot of this gold is still unknown. Mingwa is Swahili for strange one, and is a cryptid cat seen in the forests of Tanzania. It is described as a large grey man-eating cat with stripes, and is said to be as big as the biggest of lions, with tracks and markings that resemble a leopard's. And according to some witnesses, it purrs instead of roars, which just makes it adorable. Anything that purrs is automatically cute. There were several reports in the 1900s of merchants and guardsmen being attacked and dying with tufts of grey fur all around the bodies and in the victims' hands. But despite attempts by Africans and Europeans alike like, the Mingwa has never been captured. The Morgan County 3 was an absolutely horrific series of 3 killings that all took place in Morgan County, Alabama in the late 1960s. These killings involved 3 women: Mary Faye, Juanita Acker, and Joyce Drake. Now, Mary Faye was a kind, gentle soul working as a secretary in a space flight center, and she volunteered as a pianist in a local church. She went missing while on a 20-minute walk back to her house just before noon on a rainy Saturday in 1967. And soon after she went missing, a search was started. Her search went on along unsuccessfully until months later when her skeletal remains were found in a local fishing area, Wheeler Lake. Her killer was never found and no major suspects have ever been brought forward. The second woman in this case was Juanita Acker. She was a widowed mother of 3 who had fallen on hard times and was currently living out of a motel with her 2 daughters aged 12 and 16. Both daughters had gone out for the night, and when Susan, her 16-year-old daughter, returned home with her fiancé, the scene they walked in on was, to say traumatizing would be putting it lightly. Her mum, Juanita, was found dead on her now blood-soaked bed, having been shot twice in the face. Police think that someone slipped into the motel room using the spare key that Juanita had left out for her daughters, and the killer just simply shot her in the head while she was sleeping. Nothing in the room was missing. There was no sign of a struggle or evidence that this was a burglary attempt. They interviewed a few key people, but the trail quickly ended, and to this day, Juanita's killer was never found. Our third and final victim, Joyce Drake, was working at her family's general store when she left at around 10:30 a.m. to cash some checks. She was a mother of 2 and her 2 children were with her father. On this morning of January 7th, 1970, she went into the bank alone, but witnesses said they saw a large, big-built, red-headed man in the truck with her after she left. After a while, her parents started to get concerned because she hadn't made it back to the store, and soon after this, a search was started. It took all day, but later that evening, Joyce's truck was found abandoned with no sign of Joyce or of the money she withdrew from the bank. A while later, they found the money bag dumped on a nearby road, completely empty save for a single check and a single penny. And later that evening, they found Joyce, or at least what remained of her. She had been dumped on a trash pile in the snow and had been there for several hours. Her throat was slit at least 4 times and was, the sheriff said, the victim of a mad, vicious killer.
A few months ago, we received this letter in the mail. There was no name attached. They wrote asking us to look into the murder of Joyce Drake from 1970. The person also included this stack of newspaper articles about the case. So tonight, WHNT News 19 is shining new light on this cold case, murder in the snow.
There was evidence to show that she had put up a fight, and someone actually came forward to say that they had picked up a hitchhiker, matching the man's description earlier that day. But this didn't really lead anywhere, and the details around it are a little fuzzy. Over the next few years, the investigation into Joyce Drake's murder kind of stopped and started multiple times. And, very strangely, decades later, the case files for all 3 women, along with all of the evidence collected, just went missing. They are to this day still unsure about who exactly was responsible for these missing files, as there were multiple agencies and departments working on the cases over the years. But it's still a tragedy that after all of these years, especially now that their case files have gone missing, these 3 women will likely never receive the justice that they deserve. The naked fugitive was an unidentified figure mentioned briefly in the Gospel of Mark immediately after the arrest of Jesus Christ. And there followed him a certain young man, having a linen cloth cast about his naked body. And the young men laid hold on him, and he left the linen cloth and fled from them naked. It was not unusual to wear a single body cloth in those days, and these apparently occasionally did just fall off when engaged in sudden active movements like running away. As I said, his identity is still not officially known, but guesses for who he might be over the years range from James the Just, Lazarus of Bethany, Mark himself, the beloved disciple, or just some dude who happened to be there. It was also theorized that the naked fugitive was a metaphor, with the man representing the disciples, the cloth representing Jesus, and the young men representing the Romans. And so, when the Romans captured Jesus, the disciples abandoned Jesus, running off spiritually naked and vulnerable. It's a thought, and it kind of makes sense as a metaphor. But if this was a real account of a real person, his identity to this day remains unknown. The Ogopogo is this giant, dragon-like, snake-like sea creature, or rather lake creature, as it inhabits the Okanagan Lake in British Columbia, Canada. It is described as being a large serpentine creature with smooth, dark skin and a large body up to 50 feet in length. It can move at incredible speeds, coiling its body in vertical undulations, kind of like this. And that is a fantastic way to stretch. The Ogopogo is apparently more closely tied to native myths than any other lake monster, with certain indigenous tribes and peoples originally calling it Naitaka, which is a supremely powerful and evil supernatural entity. Its name can be translated as water demon, water god, sacred creature of the waters, and for hundreds of years the natives would sacrifice small animals, as they believed the Naitaka demanded a live sacrifice for a safe crossing of the lake. The name Ogopogo actually came from an English music hall in 1924. This was in Vernon, British Columbia, and the song says his mother was an earwig, his father was a whale, a little bit of head and hardly any tail, and Ogopogo was his name. The name was apparently first created in 1912, with its nickname being Oggy and some smaller lake creatures being referred to as Ogo pups, which is just adorable. One-Eyed Jack was a man who was killed after accepting a hitchhiking ride in 1978, Idaho. He was originally going to Oregon, but decided to go to Alaska instead, with his, unbeknownst to him at the time, would-be killer. And when they got to Alaska, Jack was stabbed and strangled to death by this man, and his body was dumped in the woods just off the highway. His killer was caught and sentenced to life in prison, and according to the killer, the guy's name was Jack, or John, or something J sounding, and he had only one eye, having lost it in a logging accident. Again, according to the killer, Jack was married, and he washed cars in Colorado or Utah, one of the two, but he said he thought Jack, if that actually was his real name, lied quite a bit, so he wasn't sure if any of the details he told him were even true. And while the killer was caught and identified, Jack never was. And so to this day, who he was and where he came from is still a mystery. The Permian-Triassic extinction event, also known as the Great Dying, which is cheery. This was a massive, severe extinction event that wiped out 57% of biological families, 83% of genera, which is just plural for genus, 81% of marine species, and 70% of terrestrial vertebrate species, which is to say, it wiped out a lot of life. It is also the largest known mass extinction of insects, so at least it did something right. The exact cause of the Great Dying remains unknown, but experts tend to agree that there were multiple waves of it and multiple different causes. Many agree that one of the major causes of the extinction was a series of massive flood basalt volcanic eruptions that created the Siberian traps, which are these huge, I mean, just look at them, huge areas of land made of basalt. Earth's plates apparently had an unusually massive shift, which caused huge pressure and an ungodly amount of lava to spew up from many volcanoes. These volcanic eruptions caused dramatic changes in the environment and temperature, as well as the release of large amounts of toxic and greenhouse gases, inevitably dramatically altering Earth's environment and wiping out a large majority of life on Earth. Many life forms and species went extinct after this, and many more that didn't exist before this event were actually created after everything settled, about 8 or 9 million years later. It was a pretty gnarly event. Scientists don't really know exactly what caused it, whether the volcanic eruptions that caused the Siberian traps were the cause of it, or whether something else like a giant meteor caused both the extinction and the Siberian traps. But it's still a wild topic to look into, and if you have the time and you are interested, I would highly recommend it. The Phaistos disc was a disc around yay big, made of clay found on the island of Crete. It dates back to between 1800 and 1600 BC, and it is highly unusual unusual as it bears text written in an unknown language and script. The text is written in spirals on the disc and contains 241 occurrences of 45 unique symbols. What it was made for, or even where it was made, we don't know. And although upon its discovery it was thought to be a hoax or forgery, it is now largely accepted to be a genuine artifact. The clay that the disc is made from doesn't seem to be of local origin, not even of Crete origin, and it was found in an underground temple depository that had actually collapsed, likely due to an earthquake, possibly linked to the eruption of the Santorini volcano in the 2nd century BC. And while many attempts to decipher this disc have been made, no one to this date has. And so the mystery of the Phaistos disc remains a mystery. The Phoenix Lights were a series of strange flying objects spotted in the skies of Arizona and Nevada in 1997. I mean, come on, strange flying objects, Nevada, Arizona. These lights were seen by thousands of people over the course of several hours, with some witnesses describing what appeared to be a giant carpenter's square shaped UFO, with 5 circular lights on it flying overhead. All of these sightings were put down to aircrafts participating in a pilot training program. Sure thing, official statement by the US government, whatever you say. There were many pilots who witnessed the lights and giant craft in the sky, and many of them said that they were well familiar with every type of aircraft, and that this thing was stranger and larger than anything that they had ever seen. Funnily enough, shortly after the incident, the governor of Arizona, Fife Symington III, which is a strange name, which I'm gonna be honest sounds like the name of an alien pretending to be a human, but anyway, he gave a press conference saying that he had caught those who were responsible for the lights, and he brought forward someone dressed in a very silly, very obvious alien costume, which at least he had a sense of humor about it. The Plague of Athens was an epidemic that devastated Athens in ancient Greece in 430 BC. It killed between 75 and 100,000 people, which was roughly a quarter of the population, and was believed to have entered the city through its one and only port. The plague took the life of, among many others, Pericles, who at the time was the leader of Athens. The plague returned twice more in 1429 and 1427. Those who survived the plague became immune, and so they were often the main caretakers for the sick during the next instance of the plague. But people were generally terrified of catching it, and so many people just died alone, and the bodies were left to rot, only being thrown on a pyre to burn weeks later. There was a huge mass grave dug, and nearly 1,000 tombs were dug for various people, and Thucydides' account of what happened during this time describes basically how society completely broke down. The catastrophe was so overwhelming that men, not knowing what would happen to them next, became indifferent to every rule of religion or law. The exact virus or disease responsible for this plague is still unknown, but scientists say that they have narrowed it down to roughly 30 pathogens, including but not limited to the bubonic plague, typhus, smallpox, measles, and even Ebola, which I am super glad that many of these have, for the most part, been eradicated now, which, good job science. Proto-bats. So, bats. Bats. The chickens of the cave, as some people call them. But where did they come from? Well, they pop up in the fossil record about 50 million years ago, and early specimens show that these bats couldn't echolocate, and had to rely on sight, smell, and touch in order to find their food. And from these early bat fossils, the trail just kind of ends. We're not exactly sure where they evolved from, or how fast, or in what time period. All we know is that they are bats. But we have been stumped many times like this in the past, with the origins of whales, birds, and even turtles. We did eventually find all of the missing links for these animals, which has helped map their evolutionary journey, but so far the exact evolutionary origin of bats remains elusive. The pomina is a cryptid giant snake reported in the Democratic Republic of the Congo near Lake Upemba. It is roughly 38 to 46 feet long, and it resembles an African rock python, only much larger. There were multiple sightings of it over the years, with one Belgian pilot in 1959, Colonel Remy van Leerda, claiming to have seen this giant python while flying over Katanga in the Belgian Congo. He said that he had been flying for 25 years at that point, and he had very good experience for measuring things on the ground. And he said that the snake he saw was very much close to 50 feet, and the snake has not been seen since that day. The Queen's Jane Doe was a teenager, just a girl really, thought to be between the ages of 16 and 19, who was found dead in Queens, New York, 1994. She had on a brown leather jacket, blue jeans, and a pair of black, green, and purple Air Jordans. She was never identified, and her cause of death was never determined. But while researching this one, I typed in Queen's Jane Doe, and just look how many missing people have this name. There are so many unidentified women that have gone missing in Queens, New York alone, which is honestly heartbreaking. But again, big shout out to the Charlie Project. Quark Nova. And we have some lovely space stuff. So neutron stars are the smallest, densest star that we have so far observed in the universe. They are only about 12 miles wide, and they are so dense that a single teaspoon of this star would have a mass of about 1 billion tons. 1 teaspoon! Their crust is made of pure neutrons and is 10 billion times stronger than steel, which is just wow. The only thing more dense in the universe is a black hole, and there was actually an occasion where 2 stars became neutron stars, and they were so close to each other that they ended up pulling each other in, and then the whole thing just collapsed into a black hole, which this stuff just absolutely blows my mind. So neutron stars, smallest, densest stars we know. Right, okay. Got that. So quark stars are hypothetical stars made up entirely of quarks, which is a form of matter smaller than neutrons. It is theorized that when neutron stars are put under enough pressure from their own gravity, the individual neutrons that make up the star start to break down into their constituent quarks, forming quark matter. This new star, now made up of quarks, is known as a quark star, but it is once again purely hypothetical, as we have never observed a quark star. But it is thought that when the conversion from a neutron star to a quark star happens, it releases so much energy that it results in one of the largest explosions possible in the universe, and is theorized to be the cause of gamma ray bursts, which are these huge explosions detected in distant galaxies. They are the most energetic, most luminous explosions since the Big Bang, and these bursts can last from 10 milliseconds to several hours. And after the initial burst of gamma rays, an afterglow is emitted at longer wavelengths, such as X-ray, ultraviolet, optical, infrared, microwave, and radio waves. I am just completely in love with this space stuff, so if you'd like to see more space-related mysteries, please do let me know in the comments below, as if enough of you want to see more of them, I can potentially make my own space iceberg of all of the most interesting space-related stuff that I can find, and cover it in a separate video. So without further ado, grab a drink. My choice today is honey and lemon tea, and join me as we explore the unsolved mystery Iceberg. So to start off with, we have the case of Rachel Cook. In 2002, on January 10th, 19-year-old Rachel Cook went missing from just nearby her home in Georgetown, Texas. She had just gone out for a jog and was last seen walking back to her home a mere 200 yards away. This case, 20 years later, is still cold, and detectives have no concrete theories on who took her or why. The police often get calls and tips regarding the case, especially on the anniversary of Rachel's disappearance, and the police have said that breaks in the case will likely only be made with tips and help from the public, as they apparently have nothing else to go on. As of today, Rachel is still a missing person, and her disappearance has yet to be solved. Ray Rivera was the very strange case of a 32-year-old finance writer who went missing in 2006, Maryland. He went missing from his home on May 16th, and after finding his car in a parking garage near his work, the searchers went to the top of the parking garage and looked out out over the streets and buildings down below. One of the searchers saw what looked to be a hole in the roof of the Belvedere Hotel just below. So they went to check out the hotel, and they found Ray's body directly beneath the hole in the roof, now lying there in the conference room, dead and partly decomposed. This was a very strange set of circumstances. The gap between the parking garage and the roof of the Belvedere Hotel was quite substantial, though not impossible to cross. They estimated that Ray would have had to have been traveling at around 10 miles an hour, which is roughly sprinting speed for someone in trainers, but Ray was wearing flip-flops at the time, which I don't know if you've ever tried to run in flip-flops, but it is not an easy thing to do. The Roanoke Colony. So we covered this one for the most part while covering the Dare Stones in another episode. The Roanoke Colony was the first attempted permanent English settlement in North America, founded in 1585. There was a bit of back and forth with the colony over the years, and at the time, the governor of the colony, John White, returned to England to collect supplies for the colony, as they were running low and relations with the natives weren't going too well. When John White came back to the settlement 2 years later, however, the colony was nowhere to be seen. The settlement was still standing. Nothing seemed to be burnt down or destroyed, but there was simply no sign of the colony, not in the nearby lands, waters, or islands. As I said, we have covered this one before, but there were these stones found etched with text, and these texts apparently told the story of what happened to the lost colony. Some of the major events involved the deaths of John White's daughter and granddaughter, and of the assimilation of the colony into a local native tribe. But the legitimacy of these stones, except for the first stone that was found, have been questioned over the years. So this all really depends on whether you believe the stones as legitimate, or whether you think they are a hoax. But you decide. Robert Springfield, known by his friends and families as Bugsy, was a 48-year-old man who went missing in the Bighorn Mountains in Montana in 2004. He was a military man, a mechanic, a firefighter, a real guy's guy, and he was out hunting with his 2 sons in Black Canyon, Montana. It was a fairly typical chilly September day, and after hunting for hours, his 2 sons were waiting at the pre-arranged spot that they had all agreed to meet at, and they were there, but their father was not. They waited all day until it got dark for their father there, and when he didn't show up, they contacted the Bighorn County Sheriff's Office. He was wearing heavy winter clothes and was armed with a bow and arrow on the day that he disappeared. A search was started with helicopters, sniffer dogs, horseback searches, but nothing was found. No bones, no blood, no body, no gear or equipment, until a year later. In October 2005, a hunter was hunting in the area when he heard the loud screeching of a crow. This crow was annoyingly loud and just wouldn't stop cawing. Caw, 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 caw. So the hunter followed the screeching and found the crow sitting in a tree. And below the tree, he found human remains. There was a partial skull, a femur bone, a neatly rolled up man's belt, and a pair of boots. There was also a man's coat with a tear in the back of it, and a wallet that importantly contained money. This was all that was found. No other body parts, no gear or equipment. And because of how strange this scene was, the sheriff's office actually suspected foul play, and so the FBI was brought in. The remains were confirmed to be Bugsy's, but this raised maybe more questions than it answered. Where was Bugsy's bow and arrow? Why didn't his wallet seem to be weathered at all if it had been sitting out here for over a year? What exactly happened to Bugsy, and where were the rest of his remains and gear? And Bugsy's wife said that if he were up there the entire time, that they would have found him in the initial search of the area. It is thought by some that Bugsy had perhaps been murdered, with his body being taken away somewhere and then brought back and set up in this scene. But again, his wallet still had money in it. So you'd think that if someone robbed and or killed him, they would have taken at least the money out of his wallet, if not the entire thing. But to this day, the truth about what happened to Bugsy out there is, at least for now, a complete mystery. Just a quick word from our sponsor, guys, who is me. If you are enjoying this video and would like to see more of them, do hit the subscribe button and notification bell, as it is the best way I know for you to be alerted when I release a new video. I do weekly videos here exploring many things, from murders and disappearances, ancient artifacts, to historical, scientific, and space mysteries. So if that sounds like your cup of tea, do hit the subscribe button and the notification bell, and poke the like button if you are feeling a little pokey today, and let me know what you are drinking in the comments below. But for now, let's get back to the video. Robot Wars, the third Wars accident. So Robot Wars was, for those who haven't seen it, an incredible TV series that aired on the BBC between 1998 and 2004, with 3 more seasons being made in 2016. It was, as the name suggests, a war involving robots. There was an arena, robots that people had made and brought in and could remote control. There were fire pits, spikes, blades, sparks, explosions. It was just awesome. There were also these giant housebots, as they were called, that would come into play at a certain time limit, or if the players got too close, and would just relentlessly attack the players' robots, destroying a good chunk of them. Very entertaining stuff. So the third season of Robot Wars was one of the most successful seasons of the show, but it wasn't without its flaws. A large number of the participants were unhappy with their experience behind the scenes. There were apparently at the same time incredibly important health and safety standards that they didn't enforce, while also enforcing a ton of tiny, nitpicky safety standards that didn't really make anyone any safer, but just annoyed a lot of the contestants. The leader of one of the teams said there were hundreds of rules that he opposed, most of them stupid and written by some twerp who sits behind a desk and has never got their hands dirty and made anything, let alone a sophisticated machine like a robot. He said that all of these serious incidents and accidents would occur from a lack of proper safety regulations, like checking important failsafe devices that must be fitted on all robots and checked properly by an expert who understands the robots. And lo and behold, after this statement was made and ignored, a serious accident occurred almost immediately afterwards. There was a safety key switch that all robots were required to have to make sure they didn't turn on at inappropriate times, but these often weren't checked for quality. And so there was this one robot called Millie and Bug that used a fairly cheap safety key switch, and so it didn't do its job properly, resulting in the robot actually turning on as it was being carried out to the arena. Someone got spiked by the robot's weapon and had to be hospitalized. There was also an incident in season 1 where the host at the time, Jeremy Clarkson, almost died when a spinning blade detached from a robot in the arena and flew towards Clarkson at over 200 miles an hour, narrowly missing him and embedding into the concrete wall behind him. Scary stuff. Thankfully, from what I've read, the safety standards seem to have improved over the years, but it is kind of mystifying as to why it was so stunningly bad during the season 3 wars. Rodney Marks. Now this one is kind of strange. Rodney Marks was an astrophysicist who died from methanol poisoning while working in Antarctica in the year 2000. He started to feel ill while walking from a remote observatory back to the main base, and just felt progressively more ill over the next 36 hours. Rodney sadly died the next day at just 32 years old from, and I quote, an undiagnosed condition. The media dubbed this the first South Pole murder. A post-mortem had determined that he had died from methanol poisoning, but despite these suspicions, that's basically where the investigation ended, as there wasn't really much evidence to go off and there weren't really many witnesses down this far in the Antarctic. Rodney's father has said, I don't think we're going to try and find out anymore in regards to how Rodney died. I'd see that as a fruitless exercise, which is sad, but it was a strange case with very little evidence, so the likelihood of actually finding and convicting the culprit, if there even was one, is sadly extremely unlikely. Rosalind Ballinghall was a 20-year-old student who suddenly vanished in 1969 South Africa. She was 6 feet tall, with long red blonde hair and piercing blue-green eyes. She was, as a friend put it, an amazing woman of extreme beauty. She apparently got high quite often and belonged to a group of hippies called the Cosmic Butterflies, which is such a hippie name. This group was apparently well known for engaging in group sex, drug, and spiritual activities. She loved the hippie lifestyle and unfortunately suffered from depression. So this time, when some of her acquaintances noticed her feeling down, they invited her to come with them on a forest retreat to clear her mind. This retreat was in the Neisner forests. Vast, dense, stunningly beautiful, the perfect place for a retreat. So she went along and was apparently quite enjoying her time in the cottage of this forest retreat. The group had some lunch, discussed some verses from the Bible, and prepared for a trip later on that evening. The group had their trip, and the next day Rosalind left the cottage at around 9 in the morning with just the clothes on her back and a Bible, telling friends that she was going out for a walk. She was seen by 2 staff members of the retreat, who Rosalind asked for directions to the nearest church, and then by a gardener who saw Rosalind walk across the lawn into a grove of trees and disappear into the forest. Rosalind was gone all day, and then as it started to get dark, as it normally does at night, her friends started to get worried. They waited all night for her return, and the next morning, when she still hadn't returned, they called the police and reported her missing. When asked why they didn't immediately call the police that night, they said that they thought it was pointless to call the police in the middle of the night, which doesn't really make sense. But valuable time had now been lost, and there was a steady rainfall slowly washing away any useful tracks or scent. When police arrived, they found Sasha, one of Rosalind's friends, sitting at the back door of the cottage playing a flute to try and lead Rosalind back home. Hippies. The authorities and locals, of course, started a search, but had trouble making sense of and navigating the vast, complex, dense forest, and sadly Rosalind was never found. The many theories say that Rosalind either got lost or injured or fell victim to foul play, either by strangers on the national road near the forest or by her acquaintances in the cottage, or that she had walked to the national road, which was around 4 miles away, and just ran away. She was later declared legally dead, and the mystery of what happened to Rosalind on that fateful day has never been solved. The Route 91 bandit was this guy, a serial bank robber who targeted at least 11 banks in New England over a 5-month period starting in 2021. The banks were all located along Interstate 91, and the bandit, as they called him, is described as a white male between 5'6" and 5'8", with blue eyes, light-colored hair, and a medium build. His MO was to walk up to the bank teller, hand them a note, then threaten to use his firearm on anyone who tried to stop him. He then demanded cash before quickly making his way out of the bank, into his car, and disappearing. The FBI has offered a $10,000 reward for information leading to the bandit's arrest, and he is thought to be armed and dangerous, so maybe don't walk up to the guy if you happen to spot him. Rutger Hale was the very strange case of a man who died while driving along State Highway 6 in New Zealand 2013. He was only 22 years old at the time, and while driving with his girlfriend, he was struck in the head by an object that came in through his front windshield, hit him in the head, and then exited the rear of the vehicle. The object that killed Rutger was never found, nor was it identified in any searches, residual analysis, or video or in-person evidence. Rutger's girlfriend Danielle said that she recalls a white truck or utility vehicle coming towards them, and noticed a beige-colored object about the size of a tissue box or a brick rocketing towards them. Tire marks did show that a vehicle slowed down, made a U-turn, and then left the scene, which may very well have been this white vehicle stopping at the scene after realizing what had happened and picking up the item along with all of the evidence and taking it with them. A pretty tragic and mysterious one all round, but the mystery of what killed Rutger Hale is still unsolved, and no one has been charged for his death. Saladin was a legendary sultan in the 12th century AD. His death and its cause have puzzled historians over the years, and no one has yet really come up with a satisfying answer for the cause of his death, at least not one that's universally accepted. Saladin was 56 years old and suddenly came down with a series of sweating attacks, headaches, and fever. He was weak, restless, had lost his appetite, and so doctors gave him bleedings and enemas, trying to cleanse his body of whatever was affecting him. But nothing they did seemed to help him, and eventually he couldn't even sip water, and soon after that he slipped into a coma. he did not improve, and later on, 14 days after his symptoms begun, Saladin died. There are obviously no tests or DNA evidence that we can use to try and figure out what he was suffering from. We can only use limited historical accounts. It has been thought that Saladin may have developed viral encephalitis, tuberculosis, typhus, or typhoid, but as of today, narrowing his cause of death down to just one disease or infection seems quite unlikely. Saturn's hexagon. So Saturn and Jupiter are the two gas giants in our solar system. And while Jupiter's giant red spot is fascinating, it's not incredibly mind-boggling, as it is understood for the most part to be a giant storm that is roughly 1.3 times the size of the Earth, which that's a big storm. But at the North Pole of Saturn is this. For some reason, unbeknownst to even NASA, the storms around Saturn's North Pole form a hexagonal shape, which is incredibly strange and unusual when you consider that most things in nature would tend to be circular, if anything, like storms, planets, and whirlpools, except for beehives, I guess. But space bees is an explanation that I just can't accept, on account of just how absolutely terrifying that would be. Scientists Rakesh Yadav and Jeremy Bloxham believe that there are vortexes that occur at the north pole of the planet. These vortexes are apparently caused by atmospheric flows deep within Saturn, and in turn pinch the sides of the storms, forming this hexagonal shape. It's incredibly hard to observe anything in or on Saturn, as the sunlight doesn't really penetrate through the thick clouds and storms in the atmosphere, so we're unable to see what exactly is causing the shape. They have done some research and experiments down here on Earth regarding something called turbulent compressible convection, and through these experiments they were able to create a 9-sided shape, not a 6-sided one, but something like this is still thought very likely to be the cause of the hexagonal patterns that we see on Saturn's North Pole, or, you know, aliens. Now, this is a really fun one. I don't know if it was that fun for the people involved, but let's get into it. The Sea Peoples were a hypothesized seafaring confederation that attacked ancient Egypt and other areas in the Mediterranean at around 1200 to 900 BC. Where these people came from, we don't know. Whether they were disparate groups of people or just one large confederacy, we don't know, and there have been a few different places suggested as their origin, from Western Anatolia to Aegean, to the Mediterranean islands, to Southern Europe. They could have come from any one of these, or all of them, or even from some places that no one has thought of. They are thought to have sailed all around the Eastern Mediterranean, and raided Anatolia, Syria, Phoenicia, Canaan, Cyprus, Egypt, all towards the end of the Bronze Age. And people were generally terrified of these mysterious, vicious fighters. This scene from Medinet Habu is often seen now as an Egyptian battle against the Sea People, as a lot of their hairstyles, weapons, and accessories match up fairly well with other separate accounts of them. I think what really intrigues me about this one is the mystery behind them. They seem to be pretty good fighters and sailors, but no one really knew who they were or where they came from. There were theories suggesting that they were originally European tribes, or that they were raiders or soldiers, pirates, or even migrants fleeing their country due to massive natural disasters. An inscription by Ramses II reads, "The unruly Sherdun, whom no one had ever known how to combat. They came boldly sailing in their warships from the midst of the sea, none being able to withstand them. And they never really settled anywhere or established a nation of any kind. So where they went is in some ways just as mysterious as where they came from." This one goes very, very deep and historical, and there are a ton of theories and stuff about exactly who they were and where they came from. So if you are interested in this one, I would highly recommend checking it out. The Shotgun Man was an unidentified man who killed many people in 1910's Chicago. He targeted mainly Italian immigrants, at one point killing 15 within a 15-month time span, all on Death Corner, an area in a notoriously violent Italian neighborhood. There were Italian gangs, the mafia, killings, muggings, just all sorts going on. And at the time, there were many witnesses for many of the killings. But the police were never able to identify the man, as apparently everyone was completely completely terrified of the gangs and what they would do. It has been suggested that perhaps he and the killings were actually made up, but whether he actually existed or whether he was just a boogeyman in order to scare the neighborhood and to keep people in line, we will likely never know. The Silent Man is this guy. He lives in Swansea, Wales, and his job or passion or calling or life purpose, as some would say, is to stand in the way of traffic and block the roads in his local area. Fascinating. As his name suggests, he doesn't react, he doesn't speak, he just stands there in the middle of the road. And he's been doing it for 7 years. 51-year-old David Hansen, as he is known to the law, was sentenced to 3 years back in 2017 for blocking the roads. And after serving his time, he got out and went back to the exact spot and blocked the road some more. He has been arrested and sent to jail 9 times, and each time has refused to explain himself or to explain why he does what he does. He apparently can speak but chooses not to, and has been described as not a polite man, which is a nice way of saying he's a complete dick. But what is going on in this goober's head, we may never know. The Sleepy Hollow Killer is an unidentified serial rapist and killer, responsible for assaulting at least 13 women in South Africa between the 1990s and 2007. He normally attacked sex workers, and his MO was to assault them and then strangle them to death with their own underwear. Pretty gruesome stuff. The only real suspect police had was a 32-year-old man who was arrested for allegedly murdering a 30-year-old woman nearby. When questioned about the case, the superintendent said that he didn't think the 2 cases were connected. So honestly, your guess is probably as good as theirs. The Springfield 3. On June 7th, 1992, 3 women, Suzanne Streeter, her friend Stacy McCall, and her mum Cheryl Levitt, all went missing from the Streeter family home in somewhat strange circumstances. Suzanne, 19, and Stacy, 18, had been out for graduation celebrations, and they were last seen leaving a graduation party at around 2 a.m. that morning. They decided to spend the night at Suzanne's home, as the original house that they planned to stay at was, they thought, too crowded. They likely made it home that morning, as their vehicles, clothing, jewelry, and purses were all found in the house. The following day, at around 9 a.m., one of their friends, Kirby, and Kirby's boyfriend arrived at the Streeters' home, as they had all planned to go to a water park later that morning. When they arrived, they noticed the front door to the home was unlocked, and after entering the home, they found no trace of the 3 women. The glass lampshade for the porch light was smashed, but the bulb was still intact. And while waiting, Kirby's boyfriend decided to be helpful and swept up all of the glass, which police later said might have actually destroyed some essential evidence. The pair waited inside the house with the family dog Cinnamon, who seemed to be quite agitated, and Kirby then received these strange phone calls from a restricted number, making sexual innuendos and implications. She hung up on these calls and just considered them as prank calls. They noticed that all 3 women's purses were on the floor of the living room, and there were neatly folded clothes from the night before. So it really seemed like the 2 girls had actually made it home, and had been awoken sometime in the middle of the night and forced to suddenly leave the home to where? Stacy's mum, although she may have it going on, couldn't get a hold of her daughter, and after going to the house and seeing Stacy's 2 friends there, saying that the 3 women were missing, she went into the home and immediately called the police on the family landline. On this telephone's answering machine was apparently a strange message that was left, but this message was somehow, strangely, inadvertently deleted from the tape. Police were, as you can imagine, very interested in the call and the message, and believed it may have contained some clue as to the women's whereabouts. But obviously it had been deleted and they had no way of recovering it. After the police arrived, they obviously cordoned off the house, but later said that the crime scene had likely been corrupted by the 10 to 20 people that had arrived before the police. There was no sign of a struggle or forced entry, except for maybe the smashed porch light, and the girls had likely arrived home, slept in their beds, and then been taken or left sometime in the middle of the night. Some of the suspects for this case include Suzanne's ex-boyfriend, Dustin Reckler, who Suzanne had testified against for a burglary he committed months earlier. So it is thought that maybe he attacked Suzanne as revenge, or as a way of removing her future testimony, and that Suzanne's friend and mum were just in the wrong place, wrong time. Another suspect was Robert Craig Cox, who was at the time imprisoned in Texas for kidnap and robbery. He told journalists that he knew that the three women were murdered and buried, and that their bodies would never be recovered. He was living nearby at the time of the disappearances, and when he was questioned at the time, he said that he was in church that morning, which his girlfriend confirmed. She later, however, recanted that statement and said that Robert had told her to say it. As you may have noticed in a few of these cases, this often seems like a plot by the convict, for them just to gain perks in prison, some time to walk around outside, or even notoriety. So I think we should always take these confessions with a pinch of salt. Robert said he would disclose all of the information as soon as his mum died, which could just be a way of avoiding shame from his mum, or it could just be an excuse in order to not confirm any details with the police. But either way, the case of what happened to these three Springfield women remains unsolved. Susie's dying is the eerie, true tale of a phone number in England in the 1970s and 80s that you could call from a public telephone box and hear a weird, creepy message. The number wasn't a regular telephone number. It apparently consisted of loads of zeros, ones, twos, and threes. But when you dialed it, you were connected to a woman who would speak in a monotonous voice, repeatedly saying one phrase over and over and over. Help me. Help me. Susie's dying. There is a full post explaining the potential backstory and account of this tale, and it's some pretty eerie stuff. I damn near scared myself half to death reading it at night, but I'll leave a link to it in the description below, so you can check it out for yourself. Just don't scare yourself too badly. Tamil bell is a broken bronze bell discovered in 1836 New Zealand. This bell was actually being used by a Maori woman to boil potatoes, and when William Colenso saw this, he was stunned and took the artifact to be examined. The inscription along the bottom of the bell is in Old Tamil and translates to the ship bell of Mohammedan bucks. This bell is old, like 500 years old, and is what is sometimes called an out-of-place artifact. This is an artifact that is so out of place, either in time, space, or both, that it calls into question and challenges what we thought we knew about history or a certain peoples. The presence of the bell has suggested at a possible Tamil or Indian discovery of New Zealand, or it's possible that the Indians could have traded with, say, a Portuguese sailor, who traded with others, who traded with others, who traded with others, who may have in turn reached New Zealand. So it is not proof that the Indians discovered and made contact with New Zealand that early on in their history, but it is interesting nonetheless. And I don't think there is a nobler way to cook potatoes. They are God's vegetable. The technological singularity is an interesting existential entry almost. In a hypothetical future, the single point in time at which technological growth tips over the edge and becomes uncontrollable and irreversible is the technological singularity. This was first coined by Hungarian-American mathematician John von Neumann, and it suggests that we will get to a point, possibly with AI, where a cycle will start, kind of like self-learning AI today, only more extreme. The technology will teach itself to be more intelligent, and then utilize this intelligence to make itself even more intelligent. And this loop happens over and over and over again, millions of times a second, until suddenly you have all-powerful, all-intelligent super beings, or super machines, or robots, or whatever you're calling them at the time. They will, in an instant, far outshine humans in intelligence and performance, and that essentially will be the end of humanity. One author, Werner Vinge, suggested in 1993 that if it occurred before 2005 or after 2030, he would be extremely surprised. And honestly, given 7 more years of this AI progression, he may very well be right. And just like the singularity of a black hole, we are cruising along next to the border of this black hole wormhole of intelligence. But once we cross that threshold, there is no stopping the trajectory. We will be destined to converge on that singularity, and that is terrifying. So without further ado, grab a drink. My choice today is yerba mate, and join me as we explore the unsolved mystery Iceberg. So to start off with, we have the crater, which is a crater that's not really a crater. Okay, so it's not entirely clear why this crater formed, but there are some pretty good theories to say that this unstable hill collapsed in on itself, essentially collapsing in the middle and then sloping down in on itself, forming what looks sort of like a crater. It's a pretty simple one, but it is a mystery nonetheless. The Great Attractor. So this is an image of the entire near-infrared sky, and we are somewhere here, and that is a lot of stuff. Some of these little areas and clusters contain thousands of galaxies in every little dot that we can see on this map, and that's just galaxies. Within many of these galaxies you have hundreds of millions of stars, and each star has its own solar system of planets, and each planet has its own unique dog breed. So the Great Attractor is something that we can't currently see. We can observe the effects that the Great Attractor is having on nearby galaxies, pulling them in, making them recede away from us, and the equations combined with these observations show that there is some sort of supermassive object roughly in that area causing this great attraction. And the reason we can't see it is because it lies behind something called the zone of avoidance. Now, if you'll imagine my fingers as objects in outer space, from one angle you can see all of the objects quite clearly, as they're not really blocking each other, and you can even see past them through to strange objects in the background. But when our viewing angle changes, the objects in the back are actually blocked by the objects in the front, and so you can't clearly observe the ones at the back, and you can't observe anything much past these objects. And this is what we basically deal with while looking out into space. If you imagine that our galaxy is a disk filled with stuff in this direction, then when we look this way or this way, everything is fairly clear. But if we're here and we try and look through the entire density of the Milky Way to see what's on the other side, the Milky Way itself actually blocks our view. And the area of the sky that is actually blocked by the Milky Way itself is called the zone of avoidance. And this is where the mysterious Great Attractor hangs out, just sitting there, up to no good, attracting things. Scientists aren't entirely sure what it is, but this is a fascinating entry nonetheless. The secret is a super cool real-life treasure hunt created by Byron Preiss in the 1980s. There are 12 treasure boxes, 1 book, and unlimited time. You can actually still buy the book and attempt the treasure hunt if you feel like doing so. Byron in the 1980s buried 12 ceramic treasure boxes all across various national parks in North America. Anyone who finds a treasure box is able to exchange it for a precious gem, and to this date only 3 of the 12 gems have been claimed. He died in 2005 but made sure that his estate upheld the promise to pay out the gems to anyone who finds the treasure. He kept 0 records of where he buried these treasures, so it's a very real possibility that the rest of them may never actually be found. But if you are feeling clever or even a little bit lucky, the remaining 9 treasures are still out there waiting to be found by some lucky treasure hunting son of a gun like you. The Sun's safe of unpublished videos, photos, and stories. So The Sun is a British newspaper that has been around since the 1960s and is quite well known for its newspaper equivalent, I guess, of clickbaity headlines. Nor has the newspaper ever had any real moral problems with digging up and spreading dirt on various people, be it celebrities, politicians, royal family members, or just about anyone, really. So in 2014, there was a scandal where the Sun's sister newspaper, News of the World, was accused of hacking into various people's phones in order to get juicy and newsworthy information for various stories. Yeah, pretty insane. During the trial, the former deputy news editor for the company claimed that the newspaper had a 7-foot safe filled with over 30 years of unpublished photos, videos, and stories about people. And he said that these stories were confidential, but often featured members of parliament, celebrities, and even royal family members. He said that while the stuff in the safe hadn't actually been published, it was jaw-dropping. In 2015, there was a story released of the late Queen Elizabeth II giving a certain salute in the 1930s as a child. This video was likely held in the safe for years until it was deemed the right time to release it. So the question is, what other stories, photos, and videos are in this 7-foot safe of secrets? Nobody outside of that tight circle of confidentiality actually knows, but it is likely some pretty bad stuff on many people. Timothy Pitson is a boy who went missing in 2011 Colorado. He was 6 years old at the time, and his mother had actually taken him out of school and spent the next 2 days visiting various places such as resorts and zoos. Then, days later, the police found the mother dead of an apparent suicide in her motel room. Along with the body, the police found a note apparently by the mother saying that her son was safe and in someone's care, and that he would never be found. And he never was. There were a few sightings over the years of him that turned out not to be him, and there were a few imposters who actually claimed to be the missing boy, but DNA evidence proved otherwise, and these individuals were later convicted for this. But sadly, Timothy Pitson to this day is still a missing person, and his case still remains open. The unknown man is this guy. He's been in prison since 2013 in a maximum security prison because Canadian investigators just can't figure out who he actually is. In 2012, he arrived in Montreal on a flight from Cuba, and he handed over a French passport, or a passeport de français croissant baguette, as they say in France. He said that this wasn't his first visit to Canada, and that he was returning because his friend's sister had died, and he was attending their funeral. He had a reservation in a motel in Montreal, he had $3,000 in his bank account, and he had a return airline ticket, so immigration felt fairly comfortable giving him a 10-day visa and letting him into the country. He would not return after 10 days. In fact, he wouldn't return at all. Authorities found him finally after 6 months when he was arrested in Toronto for scamming somebody. It was the classic black money scam where you basically say, look, I have all of these defunct voided notes that the bank basically threw away, but me and my associates here have come up with a special chemical that can safely remove the ink, and this will leave you with perfectly clean legal money. But instead of doing the logical thing and keeping this all for ourselves, we want to, for some reason, sell some of this fake money to you in order that you can also make a profit, because we are just generous guys like that. I feel like that's how most of these scams go down. This particular man was scammed out of over $450,000 by the unknown man and his associates, and so they were all arrested. The original passport that the man had given to the authorities was obviously faked. He also had another fake one in his hotel in Toronto. The birth certificates he had were also fake, and in every hearing that he has had, every chance he's had to give his side of the story over, he just basically tells them to go fuck themselves and says that they are illegally imprisoning him here and that he wants to be let free. The problem is, though, authorities don't want to release him back into Canada on account of them not knowing who he is and him being a criminal, and they would love to deport him if only they knew where he actually came from, as you can't just deport someone to a random country. He says he is from France, but the French say that he is not, and they believe that he is instead from Cameroon. But until he decides to cooperate, he will likely spend his foreseeable future behind bars. The West Mesa Bone Collector is a reference to the murders and burials of 11 women found in 2009 Albuquerque. The women were buried in an arroyo bank on Albuquerque's West Mesa by an unknown assailant. Eerily enough, on Google Maps, you could actually see the patches of disturbed soil and tire marks around the buried bodies between 2003 and 2005. By 2006, building development had moved into the area, and plans were soon started for a development to be built over the entire area, on top of these unknown at the time graves. In the 2008 housing bubble collapse, all the development was stopped, and due to neighbors complaining about flooding in the area, the developer built a wall to channel the floodwaters, and while building this wall, he inadvertently exposed the bones and burials to the surface. But they weren't yet discovered until a year later, when a woman who was walking her dog found one of these bones and reported it to the police. They then searched the immediate area and found the remains of all 11 women. They were between the ages of 15 and 32, most were Hispanic, and most were involved in drugs or sex work. There were a few theories and suspects for these murders, from obviously something like a single serial killer to a human/drug/sex trafficking ring. And although there have been a few strong suspects, no one has yet been charged for these killings. Why the dinosaurs died out? So when you ask most people this question, they will likely say that a comet hit Earth, and that is most likely true, but isn't completely universally accepted. So the theory of the comet extinction comes from the discovery of a layer of clay that is rich in iridium. This layer of clay is found roughly at the level where the last dinosaur bones are found, so it would make sense that whatever caused the dinosaurs to become extinct happened around the same time as whatever caused this layer to appear. Now, iridium is actually quite rare on Earth, but it is a lot more common in space. So the idea was that a comet containing lots of iridium crashed into the Earth, causing catastrophic events, and in the end, depositing a layer of iridium over the Earth. It was a pretty solid theory, but one of the problems was they didn't have an impact crater. Until 1991, they discovered a 110-mile diameter crater on the edge of the Yucatan Peninsula, and it was named the Chicxulub crater. They believe this comet was roughly 6 miles in diameter and hit the Earth at over 40,000 miles per hour, releasing 2 million times more energy than the most powerful nuclear bomb ever released. The surface of the Earth would have been completely fried, tsunamis would wash over the land, darkness and wildfires would engulf the entire Earth, massive earthquakes and volcanic eruptions would become a daily occurrence, and it goes without saying that it would have been completely catastrophic. The darkness would have lasted years, and with the perpetual darkness would come a massive drop in Earth's temperatures down to freezing levels. This would end up killing all of the plants, which in turn would kill the herbivores, which in turn would kill the carnivores, and the only animals able to survive would be tiny mammals able to burrow and to scavenge any food that was remaining. And as I said earlier, while this is a completely sound theory, it hasn't been completely proven, and there is still a fair amount of disagreement in the community as well as among scientists in regards to what actually caused the extinction. Some theories suggest a massively changing environment for the dinosaurs through either natural changes from Earth or extraterrestrial causes, to a deadly disease developing or being delivered from space via something like a comet. They've also looked at giant volcanic eruptions that spew up absurd amounts of toxic gas into the atmosphere, but it might be a while before we ever come to a conclusive, universally accepted theory for why exactly the dinosaurs died out. But if you're in doubt, I would always say, go with aliens. William Tyrrell was a 3-year-old Australian boy who disappeared from his foster grandmother's home in 2014. This photo was taken just minutes before he disappeared, and $1 million is being offered for the recovery of William. The authorities now sadly believe that William is dead, and since 2021 have treated William's foster mother and foster grandmother as people of interest in the case. One scenario that they are considering involves William having fallen off the balcony of the property, and then his death being covered up and his body disposed of. In 2003, the police recommended charges against William's foster mother for perverting the course of justice and interfering with a corpse. The story was William and his sister were playing hide and seek in both the front and the backyards of the house. The foster mother went inside to make a tea, and then after not hearing from him for 5 minutes, she started to get worried. They apparently apparently began searching the house and then went door to door to the neighbors asking if anyone had seen him. And then, when William still hadn't turned up, they called the police. Hundreds of police and community members started multiple searches, and they ran them seemingly all day and all night looking for William, but nothing turned up. Motorcycles were brought in, helicopters, sniffing dogs, and while they did manage to find William's scent, it was all confined to the property of the grandmother. There have been a few minor leads proposed and pursued over the years, but nothing concrete, and sadly to this day the whereabouts of William Terrell is still a mystery. The Woods Devil is super creepy. I mean, just look at this thing. It is a creature or group of creatures that has roamed around the hills and woodlands of Coos County, New Hampshire. They are skinny Sasquatch-like creatures, described as being around 7 to 9 feet tall, with shaggy tan grey hair. One unique, unusual, creepy behavior from the Wood Devils is that they will stand completely straight up behind a tree in order to hide when they sense that a human is coming. They will stay standing like this until the coast is clear. If there are no trees or cover nearby, the Woods Devil will still stand completely upright and completely still. Super creepy. Hikers have also heard the screams of these creatures echoing through the hollows of Coos County, and whether they are a subspecies of Bigfoot or a different type of creature all on their own is anybody's guess. The cheerleader in the trunk was an unidentified woman found dead in a footlocker in 1982. This was in Maryland, and she had been dead for between a few months and 10 years, and she was aged somewhere between 17 and 27 years old. They thought that it was likely that she was into gymnastics or cheerleading, hence the name of the cheerleader in the trunk. Cindy James was a very strange, peculiar case of a Canadian nurse who went missing in British Columbia in 1989. Only 2 weeks later, hogtied with a nylon stocking wrapped around her throat. And despite this gruesome situation, she was actually determined to have died from a drug overdose, more specifically morphine, diazepam, and flurazepam. Her death had seemingly been the culmination of many reports of stalking, harassment, vandalism, and home invasions on Cindy by an unknown assailant, all of which happened over the last 7 years. Now, this is where things and theories start to get a little weird. She had always been documented as having depression and severely self-destructive thoughts, and authorities over the years came to believe that she had for some reason fabricated a lot of these stalking and harassment claims, and that in the end she had actually faked her suicide and disguised it as a kidnapping and murder. So over the last 7 years, Cindy was constantly reporting all of these things, and when police showed up every time, they would notice just something a little off about the report. It was never anything major, so they were never actually able to expressly confirm that she had been making these up. But for instance, when Cindy had reported that a man had broken into her house and started a fire in her bathroom, they were not able to find any evidence of this man, and in fact found some evidence that pointed to Cindy actually having started these fires herself. There were many other instances like this involving Cindy being kidnapped and drugged, and then being found in a ditch somewhere with rope around her, high as a kite, with no memory of what happened. But there was never any evidence of anyone else there, or of anyone else actually having a hand in what happened to her. And when she eventually died, tied up and drugged, there was a divided belief on whether this was all the work of a sick individual that actually kidnapped Cindy, tied her up and forced her to overdose, or if it was just another more extreme act by Cindy as a cry for help or cry for attention or what have you. No one was ever convicted for any of the previous crimes that she reported or for her murder, and a jury for the case 1 year after Cindy's death said that her cause of death, whether suicidal, homicidal or accidental, was undecided, and that is where the case of Cindy James currently sits. Room 1046. A man named Artemis Ogletree had a 2-day stay in this hotel in room 1046. He was acting rather strangely over these 2 days, and then his final hours in the hotel was met with a deadly outcome. So Artemis's stay was filled with some oddities, shall we say. There were multiple times over the 2 days where cleaning ladies either went went into the room or just simply knocked on the door and saw or heard multiple people, men, women, laughing, shouting, even whispering. Sometimes a cleaning lady would come into the room, and Artemis seemed to be getting ready to go out. He would get fully dressed and then tell the cleaning lady to leave the door unlocked when she left. Then he would leave the room, apparently leaving the hotel, but one time when a cleaning lady forgot something and had to come back in a few minutes later, Artemis was somehow back in the room, fully clothed, lying in bed, with the lights off and the curtains drawn except for a small lamp. He also had various communications with someone only known as Don. For instance, one time there was a note on his bedside table: "Don, I will be back in 15 minutes. Wait." And one time a cleaning lady knocked on the door to deliver fresh towels, and a man in a loud, deep voice, not Ogletree's, basically told her to go away. Now, could this have been Don? It could have been, but we're not really sure. So on the final day, one of these switchboard operators was trying to make a wake-up call to room 1046 when she noticed that the phone was actually off the hook. So someone went up to check on the room, and the room was locked with a do not disturb sign hanging from the doorknob. After shouting through the door, Ogletree told the member of staff to enter, but they didn't have a key at the time, so they just told Ogletree to put the phone back on the hook, and they left. Then, roughly an hour later, another member of staff went up to the room, and this time he had a key. Ogletree was lying in bed with the curtains closed, completely in the dark. He was completely naked and wasn't moving at all. The staff member noticed some dark patches on the bed, which later turned out to be blood, but the staff member didn't realize that at the time. He noticed that the phone was now on the floor and just assumed Ogletree was drunk and passed out, so he picked the phone up, put it back on the hook, and left the room. A few hours after this, a member of staff went up to the room again, as the phone was once again off the hook, being on the hook. This time they found Ogletree on his knees and elbows, 2 feet from the door. The member of staff turned the light on, saw Ogletree, then, since he had his priorities straight, went over to the phone and put it back on the hook, and then he noticed that there was blood all over the room. In the bed, on the walls in the main room, all over the bathroom. It was not a pretty scene. He immediately went downstairs for help, and when he came back up, Ogletree had now collapsed in the doorway, preventing the door from being opened. They eventually forced the door open, and Ogletree actually got up, and he sat on the edge of the bathtub. He had been bound with cords around his wrists and neck and ankles, and his neck had quite severe bruising, likely from being strangled. He had been stabbed multiple times, one of them actually puncturing one of his lungs, and he had multiple blows to the head, resulting in a skull fracture. As I said, it wasn't a pretty scene. They cut the cords from around his wrists and neck, and they asked who had done this to him. And Ogletree said that it was nobody. The old Cyclops trick. And when he was asked what caused these injuries, he said that he had fallen over and hit his head on the bathtub. And then I guess the bathtub just pulled out a knife and stabbed him multiple times, and then wrapped some cord around his neck. This bathtub AI is getting terrifyingly advanced. Soon after this, he lost consciousness, and after being taken to the hospital, he died shortly afterwards. At first, he couldn't be identified, but over a year later, his mother, Ruby Ogletree, did recognize him, and she was able to identify him as her son. So what exactly went on with Ogletree over those 2 days, and who attacked him and why, we may never know. But it is a very strange case nonetheless. Marilyn Bergeron was a 24-year-old woman who went missing in Quebec City in 1983. She went out for what she said was a walk and then just never returned home. She was seen at an ATM trying to withdraw cash later that day, and then was seen in a nearby coffee shop soon after this. She had recently moved back from Montreal to Quebec City, as she told her parents that she didn't feel safe living alone in Montreal, but she didn't get into many details as to why. There were apparently several other sightings since then, but none of them have really been confirmed. And whether she took things into her own hands or was the victim of foul play of some sort, we may never know. So this was this really messed up case of this kid who was taken from his family home and drowned in a nearby river for seemingly unknown reasons. Between 1981 and 1984, the family received multiple anonymous threatening letters and phone calls, calls from a man threatening revenge on the father, Jean-Marie, for unknown reasons. And on this fateful day, Gregory's mother reported him missing to the police, as she noticed that he was no longer playing in their front yard where she had last seen him. Then, around 30 minutes later, Gregory's uncle received an anonymous phone call saying that Gregory had been thrown into the Valon River. And later that evening, Gregory was found with his hands and feet bound and a hat pulled over his head, dead in the river. The next day, the family received a letter saying that I have taken vengeance. So things in this one start to get pretty wild pretty quickly. A man named Bernard Laroche was implemented in the murder by handwriting experts and by a statement from Laroche's sister-in-law. He was taken into custody but denied any part in the killing or in the writing of any of the letters. And the sister-in-law later recanted her statement, as she said that it was coerced by the police. But still, the father, Jean-Marie, vowed that he would kill Laroche, and he said this in front of reporters. And a month later, he actually followed up on it, shooting Laroche dead as he was leaving his workplace. He was convicted of murdering Laroche and served a grand total of 2.5 years for it. Then, handwriting experts identified Gregory's mother, Christine, as the likely author of the anonymous letters. Who are these handwriting experts? And soon after, Christine was charged with murdering Gregory, and she was arrested. She was pregnant at the time and went on an 11-day hunger strike until she was finally freed, with the court citing flimsy evidence and no real motive. The case was reopened in 2000 with new DNA tests being done, but these tests, as well as further tests done in 2008 and 2013, all proved inconclusive. And that's basically as far as this case got. So a pretty sad one, but also a pretty strange one. Have you been having strange dreams? This was an unusual set of flyers that went up all over Portland, Oregon in 2015 and onwards. It consisted of this sign: have you been having strange dreams? The Willamette Valley Dream Survey is investigating a recent spike in bizarre, unexplainable dreams. If you have been experiencing any unusual dream activity, you can help by reporting a summary. Please call 971-258-1465 with a description of your dream. Calling the number on the flyer leads to this recording.
Thank you for calling the Willamette Valley Dream Survey. Please leave a detailed account of your dream after the tone. Transcripts or audio from your report may be duplicated in other media.
Where you could apparently safely leave your dream descriptions, but the whole situation to me is just incredibly odd. No one knew or even knows to this day who is running this study. A search for the Willamette Valley Dream Survey doesn't return anything fruitful, and who would be interested in collecting dream data is also a bit of a mystery. And what dreams have been collected so far over the years is a complete mystery. Colin Madsen was a 25-year-old student who died in suspicious circumstances while studying in Irkutsk, Russia. Colin was a huge fan of hiking and of the Russian language and scenery, so where better to go studying and hiking than Russia? He was on a planned hike with 3 other companions at the time, 2 Russians and 1 American. They went to sleep at 2 a.m. in this little cabin they were staying at, with the plan being to wake up 3 hours later at 5 a.m. and then leave at 7 a.m. But when the others woke up at 5 a.m., Madsen was nowhere to be seen, and his backpack and all other items were left in the cabin. After extensive searches, they found his body 8 days later in a mountainous wooded area almost 2 kilometers away. He was found face up, lying under a large tree with multiple visible cuts and abrasions all over his body. The local Russian investigation concluded his cause of death to be hypothermia and said that he was high at the time, wandered out of the cabin in the middle of the night, got lost and locked out somehow, and then died of hypothermia. But when Colin's mother sent the autopsy to an independent lab, they said that in their opinion, foul play was likely involved. But the US government refused to push the Russian government any further on the investigation, and so Russia didn't reopen the case. There are many theories as to what really happened, from a ritualistic killing to a group of criminals attacking Colin to something done by the Secret Service, but until the case is reopened and reinvestigation is started, we will likely never get to the bottom of it. Natalie Holloway was an 18-year-old girl who went missing in Aruba in the Caribbean in 2005. She was supposed to fly home on the 30th of May, but when she failed to turn up for her flight, a missing persons investigation was started. Natalie was last seen by her classmates outside of a restaurant, Carlos and Charlie's, and she was in a car with local residents Joran Vandersloot and brothers Deepak and Satish Kalpo. So the three men were obviously questioned, and they said that on that night they dropped Natalie off at her hotel, and that was the last that any of them saw of her. Further investigation raised suspicions into these claims, and Vandersloot was arrested twice in connection to her disappearance, with the Kalpo brothers each being arrested 3 times. The FBI then got involved, special agents, Dutch soldiers, special Air Force aircrafts, all participated in an immense search, but sadly they could not find Natalie or her body. The next year they closed the case without charging anyone for her disappearance, but the year after that they reopened the case after receiving video footage of Vandersloot high saying that Natalie had actually died on that day and that her body had been disposed of. He denied that this was true, but then later said that he had sold Natalie into sex slavery, and then he later retracted that comment as well. And can I just say that this guy seems like an all-round arrogant dick, and if you watch a full video on the case you will see exactly what I mean. But 4 years later, Vandersloot was actually convicted of the murder of 21-year-old Stephanie Flores Ramirez in Peru, and he was sentenced to 28 years. Natalie was later, at the request of her father, declared legally dead, but in my eyes it's very likely that Vandersloot had a large hand in her murder and disappearance. The Wednesday Strangler is an unidentified Japanese serial killer responsible for the killings of 7 women from 1975 to 1989. He's called the Wednesday Strangler because 6 of these 7 killings took place on a Wednesday, so this man apparently had a schedule to keep. The victims ranged from an 11-year-old schoolgirl to a 50-year-old housewife, and they were all likely ambushed and strangled. A suspect was arrested in 2002 for 3 of the murders, but he was later acquitted, and to this day the case of the Wednesday Strangler remains unsolved. And that is all we have time for. I really hope you enjoyed exploring the 4th tier of the Unsolved Mystery Iceberg with me. Feel free to check out each episode as they're released, and if you'd like to watch every mystery covered so far, I have the full playlist down in the description below for you to binge watch or fall asleep to. And as always, thanks for watching.